They agree on something small, because small is defensible. No Morse, no primes, no cute encodings that could be accused of meaning more than they meant. Just blink, pause, blink. 1 beat long, 1 beat empty, 1 beat long. Impose on Oracle's shutter like a metronome with manners. Sarah programs it into the capture cadence, a mild stutter that should do nothing but irritate a statistician. Kaya watches the rig status lights settle into the pattern, tiny green lids closing, opening, thinking better thinking too much. The junior analyst rolls his chair back, as if distance will make him more honest. Greer folds his arms, but not in a defensive way, in the way of someone who intends to stay. They run. The dot rests steady. The organoid, parked in its cradle proxy because the balloon is cooling and the sky has gone back to being unambitious, offers its living glaze to the math. Oracle blinks, pauses, blinks, clean, repeatable, pretty. The next frame's answer. Not after. With the even images carry the luminous contour they learn to fear at altitude. The odd carry the room, the limb, the whatever the day has decided to remember. Each time the shutter closes with Sarah's little pattern, the luminous contour shivers in lockstep and returns with the same breath held where the pause goes. It is not lag. It is sync. The zipper of 2 truths learns to hum. Again, Sarah says, because repetition is the slowest nobility. She increases the pause to 2 beats. The contour holds away for 2 beats and comes back with the patience of someone trying not to teach them too fast. She tightens the blink to a half beat. It answers with a half beat, not guessing, not late. The junior analyst whispers a profanity that could also be a prayer. On the audio track, the one that swore would only keep the room's polite noises, the one they have wrapped in copper and suspicion, a shape creeps up through the floor of hiss. It is not volume first. It is form. Energy gathers around certain frequencies, the way frost gathers on a window with an opinion. The comb filter in the analyst's hands is suddenly not a filter, but a shepherd. He teases the pattern out of the noise in small, guilty increments, aware of the sin of coaxing meaning where none belongs. The word arrives sideways and then straightens, syllables assembling like people recognizing one another on platform. Observe. It is not shouted. It is a gentler command voice you use on a dog that already knows how to sit, but needs reminding. Observe. The vowel is longer than the consonants agree to. The sibilant carries a little reverb that no room in Annex 4 owns. The future feed and administration mouse the shape first, cutting 30-second a path through the air. The present track follows, then the room, then the blood. The pilot sags in his chair just a fraction, smiling without consent because the instruction is the least offensive thing they've been told all week. Lock that, Greer says. The analyst tags waveforms until the screen looks like a parade of small flags. Kaya presses her stethoscope to the receiver rack again, and hears nothing but the rack trying to be brave. Sarah writes the word in her notebook. It does not look like hers. It looks like something a teacher would put on a board on the first day of a class you did not know you were taking. She circles it once. Then, very quietly, she writes under it, not obey. She changes the pattern. Blink, pause, blink, pause, pause. An asymmetry to accuse the mechanism. The frames reply, contour, none, none. A 1-to-1. She tries an echo. Blink, pause, pause, blink. The answer is a neat shadow. The mirrors around the room lag by their fractions, then learn the cadence, then become smug with it. Reflections holding their hands up an instant longer, as if testing the edge of Sarah's patience. She flips the axis. Instead of shutter, she imposes a pattern on the dot. On, off, on like a child winking. The luminous contour answers in the frames, not by dimming. Light from the other side does not dim, but by smoothing, as if pressing its cheek harder, then lifting, then pressing again. In the mirror, Sarah's reflection lifts her hand in time with the dot. Briefly and unconsciously, she curses herself and lowers it. The mirror, Sarah keeps it raised a fraction, faithful to the rhythm, then falls back into line. In procurement, the future feed raises its hand 30 seconds early and refuses to apologize. The whisper returns in the audio path with the confidence of someone who has already been introduced. Observe, again, and then the courtesy of a second word that is either encouragement or threat depending on the hour of the day, Continue. It arrives a half beat after Sarah's pattern, as if choosing to be a follower or choosing to be seen as one. The analyst adjusts for group delay and finds that, with that accounted for, the word lands in a crack between the blinks, occupying a pause like a host sliding into a vacated chair. Try inversion, Kaya says, suddenly complicit, surprising herself. Sarah nods. She inverts the contract. Pause, blink, pause. The contour vanishes on the pauses and appears on the blinks. No, not appears. Arrives, aligned to the act of opening as if the permission lives there. In the audio, the sibilant in observe lengthens, wrapping around the open shutter, like water around a post. Greer, who has let this breathe, takes back an inch. We've proved synchronization, he says. Prove boundary. Sarah hears him and feels herself obeying already. She programs a pattern that includes a forbidden bit. Shutter held open beyond the camera's comfort, longer than any exposure the lab would normally tolerate. Oracle complains in its polite machine way. The imagers heed a fraction. The software writes her a warning without the courage of all caps. She keeps the gate open. The luminous contour does not simply persist. It changes. The brow ridge brightens, then lowers. The cheek hollow reduces its depth like someone removing their face from a window one breath at a time. When she finally lets the shutter close, the next frame of the room looks momentarily surprised at itself. Edges a little wrong, as if the world needed a beat to remember where everything goes. The audio stops being a single word and tries something longer, failing in public like a student who meant well. Ob, serve, con, and then a collapse into hiss. The junior analyst claps a hand over his mouth, not to be quiet, but to be physically present to his own body. Sarah lowers the ambition back to blink, pause, blink. Observe returns, relieved to be itself again. Where does it live? The ocular surgeon asks softly, not for a report, but put the question in the air like a bird he hopes will land on somebody else's desk. Where does the reply come from? Inside the exposure, Sarah says, before her better self can hide behind caution. Inside the act of looking. It rides the edges you make when you ask to see. She hears herself and edits the version that will be allowed to exist. Response signal aligns to capture gating. Source indeterminate. Coupling suggests aperture-dependent modulation. It is impressive how quickly you learn to translate sincerity into paperwork. They try a destructive control, because righteousness in a lab is a vice. Sarah reroutes the pattern to a dummy shutter that toggles an LED no sensor can see. Oracle runs dark. The audio answers nothing. The frames are quiet. She restores the pattern to the Real gate. The reply returns like a dog you pretended you weren't calling. Observe. Continue. A third time, maybe under breath, as if practicing politeness. Please. Greer gives them room to be disobedient once. And they take it well. Sarah shapes the pattern into a small hello that is not a word. Blink, blink, pause, blink. The contour replies in cadence, and the audio, relieved to be asked to do a different trick, mutters a between-breath thing that could be a laugh or misheard consonant. The unplugged screens onto the dance and then on the administration panel. The future feed lifts Sarah's mirror hand in advance, as if asking if she intends to join. She does not. The mirror lowers anyway, late and loyal. Luis watches the scope for clock cycle Oracle and waits for his traitor brain to bond with it again. It does not. The rectangle is absent today. His relief is not simple. He raises his hand to mirror in time of the pattern, not because he likes obedience, but because being in time feels, for one dangerous instant, like being forgiven. He drops it. The faraway Louise in the corner seem keep theirs up a fraction, a line of tiny men doing what the first man would not. Kaya, who does not enjoy theology at work, holds her stethoscope to the rack during the word's next arrival and notices something indecent. The murmured sideband around the carrier heartbeat swells and slackens with the shoulders of the room. On the syllable serve, 3 people exhale involuntarily. She leans back and writes on her work, order a note that is not a note. The building is breathing with the radio. Sarah breaks the pattern on purpose. Blink, pause, blink, pause, blink, blink, pause. The frames keep up, bright then absent, present then gone, then on the double blink. The contour seems to widen its cheek and then narrow it, A strange, shy gesture as if practicing widening and narrowing the way a child practices winking with the wrong eye. The audio pulls the word apart and then declines to improve. Observe arrives one more time with a dignity that warns him against making a toy. What do we do with this? The junior analyst asks finally, a little wrecked, as if asking how to carry water in his hands. They all have their jobs. Greer's is to translate all into protocol. We keep doing it until we learn what doing it does, he says. We log cadence fidelity. We map response thresholds. We do not escalate. He looks at Sarah without looking cruel. We do not ask questions we don't want answered. After they stand down the rig, the mirrors keep their lag like a muscle memory. Sarah washes her hands at the sink in the corner and watches the reflected water sheet off her knuckles 3 heartbeats behind. As if the reflex of rinsing had drifted, she turns off the tap. In the glass, the water keeps running just long enough to make her hate herself for wanting it to stop. She returns to the console and, when no one is looking, writes a line she will scratch out later. Pattern is a kind of consent. Then she draws a small box around the word observe and adds a dot after it, as if conjuring punctuation could convince the room that the instruction has been completed and no further instruction is necessary. That sits there like a tiny gate that has learned how to be open and close at once. The unplug panel in procurement flashes its polite black inset. For a single frame, it shows not the lab, not the limb, but a surface so close and curved that all it carries is a suggestion of a brow and the bright smear of something like a tear on the wrong side of glass. The future Sarah on administration lifts her hand and keeps it up, not in refusal, not in surrender, but in the only ritual they have that isn't violence. Hello, I see you. The present Sarah breathes once and looks away, not because she cannot bear it, but because looking is now a kind of speech and she would like, just for one beat, to listen. They prep him like ritual and math at once. Lieutenant Arundel, flight qualified, centrifuge board, the kind of calm that has been rehearsed until it looks like personality, steps into the harness with the obedient grace of someone who has been strapped into stranger things. Kaya checks the buckles twice, once as an engineer and once as a person who wants a promise. The pilot gives him a look that contains eternity and a warning he can't articulate. Luis checks the lead integrity to the biometric suite. ECG, SpO2, skin temp galvanic. EEG cap nested under the visor's ring. Oracle status strip goes green, green, green with the petty satisfaction of a system permitted to judge. Say your name. Sarah says, because you begin an exposure by anchoring something that knows it's alive. Lieutenant Arundel. He says the consonants tidy. Comms check clean. His baseline is almost arrogant in its neatness. Heart rate 70. Variability good. Pupillometry normal under the dot's soft tyranny. He rolls his shoulders, wants to explain to his muscles what not to do. Greer watches without staring and occupies the room with the weight of someone who has already said no to 5 unreasonable things today. Drop sequence begins. Gravity loosens its paperwork. The dot appears. The cadence Sarah program, blink, pause, blink, threads itself through the shutters like a secret handshake everyone pretends not to notice. The mirrors are present in the periphery with their new habit of being late. The unplugged panels across campus take attendance. For the first seconds, the world is obedient. Telemetry lines sit where they ought. Oracle drinks without spilling. The rig camera shows Dahl in profile. Jaw set but not clenched. Eyes do what eyes do under orders. The Doppler on his breath is the sound of a door being opened and closed carefully. Then it happens. So simple it feels like an insult. Mid-run, with all the numbers holding hands. The cameras agree on a lie. The harness is empty. Not a glitch. Not a smear. The rig feed, high-res, redundant, clocked by a crystal that would rather break than drift, shows straps under tension with no body inside them. The occipital rest bears weight. The sling arcs as if carrying a man's shape. The buckles bite into nothing. The corners of the harness leave little shadows on a torso-shaped absence. In the first surface mirror, the rig reflects an empty cradle holding a disciplined void. In the ceiling cam, the same. In the observation bay glass, a ghost of straps with nobody to justify them. Freeze, Greer says by habit, and then, don't you dare, because stopping would make the room a courtroom. Sarah's hands are already moving. Splitting views. Rig cam A, rig cam B, mirror feed, lid camera, environmental. CO2 in the cage remains elevated like a person is breathing there. Thermal? Kaya routes the IR. The harness glows where skin and cloth should be touching. A human heat signature rests in the sling's curve like conclusion. And yet the pixel filter has no edges to love. There is no outline to segment. LiDAR, dragged reluctantly from storage for a just in case they never wrote down. The point cloud paints straps, frame, visor ring, a neat empty volume where a man would be. Aaron, Sarah says into the intercom with the tone of someone coaxing a skittish chemical across a barrier. Status. His voice arrives on the net like well water. Nominal, he says. Breathing even. That's stable. I feel more room than usual. His words don't carry the shrug his body probably makes when it says something true and undramatic. Vitals, the ocular surgeon prompts. Pause at a place where medicine still remembers how to help. ECG steady. SpO2 99. Blood pressure tame. EEG. Dahl's cortical rhythm lays itself obediently across Oracle's master tick with no treasonous synchrony. No theft today. All green, Louis says, and hates the phrase even as he needs it. On admin's future panel, 30 seconds ahead, the empty harness appears before the present can be wounded by it. The future Sarah is already cutting the screen into quadrants we haven't cut yet. The procurement frame's black inset window opens and shows Annex 4 from a corner near the ceiling that doesn't believe in corners. The empty rig looks like a laugh the room hasn't had. In logistics, the vintage TV hums a slow, consenting hum it didn't know to learn. Where's his voice? Kaya asks, practical and irreverent. The array room mic hears it as local. The pilot's suit mic hears it as local. The cage mic hears it as near. There's no delay between channels. Triangulation says, here, the space where the absence it speaks with a mouth the cameras refuse to cast. Describe, Sarah says, then correct herself to verbs that don't look like invitations. Report environment. Dahl answers calmly, so calmly it wounds a room. I can see your thoughts move, he says, and the sentence lands like a thing that is either madness or measurement depending on what you let it touch. He does not sound delighted. He does not sound afraid. He sounds like a man reporting, whether through a cockpit window, the air forgot to frost. Clarify, Greer says, the syllables stack like blocks to be safe. Dahl obliges. Not words, he says. Not language. Just the way they tilt. When you decide, they cast a shadow. Sarah, when you choose where to look next, it's like a ripple. Colonel, when you decide to stop something from happening, it's straight. Like a bar. Luis keeps, tasting a number, and I don't know how to tell you what that means. Luis laughs without choosing to. The laugh has one less consonant than it started with. Sarah drags a window up. Phase of gaze predictor she built badly last year and has been ashamed of ever since. It pings when her oculomotor plan fires microseconds before her eyes prove it. Dahl's sentence lands, and the predictor pings at the same beat. She thinks to move to the mirror feed. The admin screen shows her doing it 30 seconds before she knows she will. Correlate, she says, and the analyst does, pale and industrious. Can you see yourself? The ocular surgeon asks before the room can decide whether to forbid kindness. Negative, Dahl says, but the straps know about me. The rig creaks the tiny, polite creak it makes under a person's weight. The empty harness looks guilty in every frame. The mirrors misbehave beautifully. In the first surface panel, Dahl's absence is loyal, a rig holding nothing. In the corner seam, deeper down the corridor where reflections stagger their courage, a late copy shows him for a single stuttering frame. Just sleeve, forearm, a hand in the sling, then loses him again as if a time slice got tired. Sarah tags at ghost frame as if it will apologize later. Audio, the analyst says softly. He raises the room mic. It is too quiet in the way quiet gets when it belongs to attention. Then the old friend arrives, modest and precise. Observe. The word threads a hush like stitching. Dahl answers it without choosing to. I am, he says, and only afterward seems to hear that he said anything at all. Sorry, felt rude not to. Greer looks up, not at the ceiling that exists, but at the other one, the the one they have been walking under lately. Boundary conditions, he says, a command disguised as suggestion. Sarah pushes a gentle perturbation through the dot. A 2-degree hop at a cadence only someone practicing politeness would keep. Dahl follows perfectly, and the empty rig shows the same small jerk and strap tension a beat later, as if the harness were remembering being touched. The luminous contour does not appear. Today there will be no cheek against the world. New trick, new rules. Thermal on the visor ring. Kaya says, the ring warms, then cools, a breath cycle with no mouth. CO2 rises and falls like a sleeping animal. The LiDAR points return, nothing where a face would be. The radio carrier hums with a heart that is not Dahl's, but is again, faintly, human-shaped. It paces at 72, as if trying not to be in the way. I can push, Dahl says tentative, as if asking whether that would be rude. No. 3 people say it once. Greer says it last and makes a policy. Do not push. Report change only. Dahl inhales. Copy, he says, and you can hear the word sit down. Sarah risks the question she would prefer to burn. Aaron, do you perceive the mirrors? A pause. The kind that is not hesitation, but census. Yes, he says. Most of them are late. The one in front of me is trying to agree with you. The one in the corner doesn't care what you want. It cares what the room wants. The future screen, he stops, as if turning his head, and yet no, Pixel admits it. The future is already done deciding and is patient about it. Do you see the word? The junior analyst blurts, because tact and I'll share a thin bone in his skull. Which word? Observe. Another census. I hear where you've hidden it in the noise, Dahl says. I see it nowhere, but I can feel when you choose to obey it. That's louder. For 10 long seconds, nothing new happens, which has become the rarest thing. Then the rig cameras make a decision of their own. For precisely 1 frame, the empty harness is not empty. Dahl is there, fully eyes open, hand flexing the sling, caught mid-breath in that off-guard human way that makes photographs look like truth. The next frame erases him back into tension nothingness. The admin panel shows a returning frame 30 seconds first, as if kindness were a schedule. Sarah stabs a key to freeze, and the freeze lands a hair late. She magnifies, pupils, iris, a tiny nevus at 10 on Dahl's left. No. She thinks, checking, right? No, left, damn it, and hates that identity can be reduced to flex on a disc. She tags it with a hunger she will deny in the report. Luis, against instruction and for love of the work, whispers you there into a mic that cannot hear secrets. I'm here, Dahl says from nowhere. I've always been here. He sounds less like reassurance than like an inventory. Bring him up, Greer says, careful, ready to pay for whatever that verb might cost. The cradle hums at humble hum and returns the rig to a world that wants its weight back. The cameras, choosing to be novel, keep the harness empty all the way to the stop. The buckles release and fall against invisible shins. A moment later, Dahl is standing on the pad exactly where standing would put a man, as if he popped into compliance to keep from scaring someone who doesn't deserve it. His vitals never left green. The LiDAR says he appears. The thermal sighs in relief at having lines to draw. He takes off the visor with the careful reverence of removing a crown you did not vote for. His hair bears the pressure story. He looks, for the first time since he began, tired in a way that won't show up in blood. Sarah steps forward and stops herself from touching his sleeve, because touching has started to mean more than it used to. Are you okay? She asks, violating 3 policies by accident. Yes, he says and looks puzzled. But I know where your next note goes. He nods at her notebook, and she feels her hand move toward a clean margin before she can be proud enough to stop it. What did you see? Greer asks, restored to the one question he trusts. Dahl thinks like a pilot, fast, lonely, exact. You, he says, not faces, vectors, choices moving before you make them. The empty place where I was supposed we got very interested in the places you might go next. It was kind. He grimaces at the word, then lets it stand because honesty, too, is a policy. On the audio, a last small courtesy stitches itself through the hiss. Quieter than anyone deserves. Observe, it says, habitual. Then a second word that lands where breath lives. Remain. The mirrors keep their lag. Sarah lifts her hand and her reflection, loyal to a slightly different time, keeps it raised after she drops it. She looks away first, as if that were a skill. Doll watches a reflection watching her and, very softly, nods, whether to her or to the room is a problem for later. Sarah writes the word remain and, beneath it, in letters small enough to be invisible unless you're already looking. Here. They shut the building the way you shut a story you don't want anyone to finish for you. Parallax becomes a noun that eats other nouns. Security lines at the campus perimeter shed their friendliness and put on rank. Badges that always beeped cheerfully now read the way judges read. The doors acquire a second lock that doesn't make a sound when it decides you are not invited. The HVAC learns a new cadence that smells like clean rooms and courtrooms. Sound masking hums down the corridors with a blank tone of secrecy poured into walls. Greer signs the order with a pen that will know more about endings and beginnings by the time this is done. The memo language is merciless and familiar. Facility seal for extended integration event. Ingress/egress by escort and exception only. Comms under operational discipline. Non-compliance to be read as bad faith. It has the warmth of a metal chair. The liaison with the iron smile walks the hall, collecting signature acknowledgments, like a census taker who knows what you eat and when. Families are contacted in a wave timed to blunt suspicion without inviting conversation. A script arrives in Sarah's inbox and then is printed and slid across her desk anyway, because paper still bullies truth in certain rooms. We're on deployment. It says in a voice trying not to be a copier's. We'll be limited in contact. We're safe. We love you. We'll see you when the weather says so. An 800 number staffed by kindness gets spun up to receive spouses and partners, and one retired father who answers every unknown call, because maybe it will be the hospital. Dahl reads his version aloud into a phone in an office with the blinds lowered, and is surprised to hear that he can make a voice that decent. The pilot speaks to a machine and imagines a machine one day explaining to his wife why it did not know how to capture tone. Luis leaves a message and then deletes it because it sounded like he was at sea, and then leaves another and tries not to use the word work like a shield. Kaya calls her sister and says nothing about balloons or hearts on radio. She says roof leak and assist and back soon, and the sister says bring the wrench I like, and they both forgive the lie for having the right size. External storage dies politely. Drives that had lived fat, warm lives in a server rack suddenly decide to be saints. A script pushed from somewhere ringed by legal teeth instructs them to forget. Firmware salutes. The LEDs blink their pennants. You can hear the faint, careful churn of platters finding arguments with zeros. The imaging station's bays go dark like windows in a neighborhood that has decided to sleep through a parade. Someone brings out a lab notebook to record what the erase refused to witness. Progress bars, percentages, the way people stand while waiting for absolution machines to declare themselves clean. When the drives return with their blinking liturgies concluded, each offers the same improbable relic. A checksum field that will not obey. Hex that ought to be honest spills out into ASCII you could read over a child's shoulder. 48.4 F4D45. HOME. The junior analyst laughs once in a way that makes him look like he might break his own face if he does it again. Coincidence, he says, which is the first refuge of people who know how to count, and the last refuge of people who know where numbers go to confess. Kaya takes one drive to a bench and power cycles it half a dozen times to see if the fluke will repent. The checksum sits there with the self-confidence of a small, perfect rock. Home. Treat is contaminated. Greer says, as if language were solvent, the evidence bags accept the drives like organs on ice. A new policy appears about scrubbing media at a physical layer and then throwing the remains into a kiln. It includes a paragraph about checksums and magical thinking. It is specific and angry. It is the kind of paragraph written by someone who has been kissed on the mouth by coincidence and did not like how that felt. The unplugged screens around the campus, which once had the grace to wait until invited, enter into a truce. They hold black, mostly. Every hour or so one of them shivers and shows annex for as it will be 30 seconds from now. Sarah's hand hovering, a door opening, a cup lifted, a mirror remembering its lateness. Procurement skeleton panel allows itself a single polite inset each afternoon, a black rectangle that opens on an angle just above the Faraday door and then closes itself, as if rehearsing a courtesy. Administration's panel keeps its devotion to the 30-second future the way a metronome keeps time while the musician argues with her instrument. Facilities arrives with carts of epoxy and an expression of having been asked to fix a prayer. They back out certain screws inside the cage, paint the threads with a compound the color of authority, turn them home, and paint cross lines so any betrayal will announce itself in a bright wound. The observation window's frame receives a second gasket. The fire doors grow a steel tongue. Kaya signs off on each change with a note that says not that it will work, but that if it doesn't, she will at least be able to say where it failed. The building gives off the smell of adhesives and intention. They take away personal laptops and phones with courtesy that feels like a clinic. The intake forms are long enough to be read as a favor. Devices disappear into Faraday lockers sewn with copper like old money. A man with a stickered pelican case offers to image Sarah's tablet for her, and she surprises herself by stepping back. She places on the cart as if it were a cat that might bolt. The man's case has a small white rectangle of tape on it, with the legend mirrors in neat hand. She smiles because sometimes the world tells on itself with such clumsiness you have to forgive it. Greer calls an all hands that is not all and is not hands. He speaks in the plural of policy. He speaks in the singular of risk. You will sleep in assigned rooms, he says, which meet a murmur, and then kills it gently with per diem and the name of a hotel across the street that has decided not to notice. You will write in the logs, and you will accept that the logs may write back. You will not remove anything from annex, for that looks like a word, unless it was born paper and remains paper. He does not mention home. He does not need to. The word floats a centimeter above the floor, like fog. Sarah asks, because she has learned that obedience is easiest to carry when it has been humiliated by a question, what's our end point? She means, what will we call enough? Greer does not pretend to mistake her. When repetition becomes prediction, and prediction becomes shelter, he says, it is not an answer, and it suffices as one. You can build a day around a lie like that if you're careful. Luis finds himself looking at the badge reader, as if it were a face deciding him each time. The pilot sees the mirrors and nods to them in passing. Not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledging a neighbor with a loud dog. The ocular surgeon writes his reports with the steadiness of a man who survived training by learning to never be moved by his own adjectives. Dahl keeps his voice low, as if volume is consent now. Kaya sends a requisition for more copper mesh and adds a note, ambient obedience high. Recommend redundancy. Someone in procurement, against instruction, and because they are human, replies with thumbs up emoji, and then calls Greer's office to apologize for having used a picture to say yes. They start sleeping here. The hallway lights dim to a domestic meanness. The vending machines have been emptied for security and replaced with clear bins of packaged food that taste like they gave up being food to pass a background check. Someone leaves a bag of oranges on the break room table with a post-it that says vitamin C in all caps. An orange disappears, then another. The third sits there like a sun. No one wants to claim. Evenings sound like rubber saws and radio set politely low. The sound masking deepens after midnight, or maybe your ears grow bored with being honest. The cleaning crew, long ago briefed into silence by the existence of floors that save lives, wheel their carts past Annex 4 without pausing. One of them, a woman whose hairnet is a better kind of discipline than any badge, stares at the observation window for one heartbeat longer than allowed. On administration's panel, 30 seconds ahead, you can see her do it again. On day 3 of the seal, a new line appears at the bottom of the whiteboard outside Annex 4, where someone has been quietly inventorying the surreal the way you inventory solvents. It says, checksum quirk persists, HOM sigma on 1 of 12, HEX stable, deck shame. No one admits to writing it. The sigma with a little hat is not company style. Sarah stands there in the fake hallway light and thinks, wildly, about home. Not as a place with coffee and laundry and a chair that fits her back like a memory. As a coordinate the room keeps trying to hand them. Home is a checksum that refuses to erase. She takes her notebook to the cage and sets it down on the lip of the console, like an offering. She writes nothing for a long time and lets the building do its breathing. On the procurement panel, 30 seconds forward, she watches herself write 2 words. She can make out the second. Stay. She closes a notebook to see if defiance changes the future. 30 seconds later, the future Sarah writes it anyway and underlines it with the irritation of someone who has been asked to perform a proof she already did in another class. Present Sarah opens her notebook and finds a line there in her own hand. Ink not yet dry. The underline is angrier than she would have chosen. Stay. Greer watches from the doorway with the posture of a man who knows what orders cost. Families? He asks, meaning are you making them real in your head yet? On deployment, Sarah says. Apparently so are we. He nods. The difference is we're not allowed to come back with souvenirs. She almost tells him about home and then checks him again and doesn't. He knows. Of course he knows. The word sat in the room the way unseen things sit. Like a pressure, a direction, a promise, or a warning depending on what kind of day you are having. That night, the unplugged panel in administration blinks a single frame into dark when no one is there to be supervised by it. Annex 4 empty. Mirrors remembering their lag to an empty crowd. The Faraday door shut with its new painted crosses unbroken. In the little black inset window, for a breath, for hex characters appear on a pale field as if typed by a machine that wanted to be a hand. 48-4 F4D45. Then the panel returns to being an obedient rectangle. The building sleeps around it the way hospitals sleep. Eyes closed, pulse steady, ready to rise and lie on command. He doesn't get tips anymore. He gets packages with no return and a feeling that someone has remembered his middle name. The reel arrives in a padded envelope that smells like old tape and newer hands. No note, just a slip of leader with the kind of block letters you print when you're trying to impersonate anonymity. Play in total dark. He's a journalist, only in the sense that he still believes the world misbehaves better if someone writes it down. He has a projector because he likes objects that do one thing. He draws the blackout curtains in his one bedroom until the room becomes a cupboard. He tapes a towel along the door seam because light is an informant. He unspools a foot of film. Clear stock, no emotion he can see, no edge code to flatter archivists. The sprockets are clean. He threads a reel and points a projector at a roll-down screen he bought when newspapers were still thick enough to trip over. He clicks the switch. The fan wakes with a domestic whir. The lamp comes up to a hush of brightness. Nothing, just a matter of screen lit like a blank confession. He lets it run because the instruction says total. In the total, he hears his breath and fan, and the building's patient water. He adjusts focus because believing you can sharpen emptiness is one of the ways humans comfort themselves. Blankness remains exactly the right distance away. He stands with the remote and, for lack of a better experiment, turns to look at the window, black glass behind the curtain where his own apartment should terminate. In the reflection and projection on that glass, he sees something the screen refuses. Faint shapes like faces in the layer behind him, hovering at the edge of visibility as if the dark were impressed with their names. Not faces as photographs, no detail to flatter a police artist, but pressure maps of features. A brow brighter than absence, a cheek hollow suggested by a notch in light, a mouth darkened not by pigment, but by the idea of a mouth. He reaches toward the pane and the faint faces tilt, not toward his hand, but toward the fact that he has moved at all. He thinks. Ghosting. He thinks. Pareidolia. He thinks, finally. He lifts his phone out of habit and uses the front camera as a sneaky mirror. On screen, himself, lit by nothing, and behind him not the wall, but the pressure of people who are not people way a draft is not a door. He lowers the phone and they become less certain, as if they prefer glass that admits it is glass. He kills the projector to see if they persist. The faces die with the light. He switches it back on. They recompose, faintly more eager. He lowers the curtain edge a centimeter. A thread of street lamp leaks into the room, and the faces flatten, as if offended by poor conditions. He seals the leak, and they swell again, pressed against his pain like breath in winter. He speaks because silence feels like consent. "Who sent you?" he asks, and his voice shakes even though it doesn't matter. The projection hum answers him with light. In the reflection, one of the not faces seems to angle its attention toward his mouth. He turns his head and all of them turn with the head, or rather with the intention to turn. He sees a decision move first, then the faint shapes trace it in tiny courtesies. He tries a trick he is embarrassed to know. Blink, pause, blink. In the glass, the faint mouths not widen in time, a rumor sync that makes him laugh a small, unbrave laugh. He tries 3 blinks and hates himself for hoping. The shapes keep up without triumph. He calls a colleague because no one has taught him how to keep miracles. The call rings twice and then truncates into an apology tone that the phone plays when it thinks it knows what's best. He calls the paper. The call connects, then becomes a dial tone without transition, like a sentence that forgets its subject. He puts the phone on the table, screen up, and catches his own reflection in it, with the faces practicing patience inside the black. The reel ticks on. In the last quarter, the projection flickers with a small rhythm he doesn't command. The faint faces gather into a tighter composition, less wash, more contour. For a handful of frames of reflection accepts a clearer grammar, a brow ridge like a weather front, the suggestion of a jawline that wants to be a coastline. He steps closer to pain. The knot faces brighten and then, for one indecent stutter, list toward him as if something had leaned from behind. He says, "What do you want me to see?" The building takes his voice and files it under night. In the reflection, a faint oval enlarges around where his head would be if he were on the other side. He has the stupid impulse to wave. He waves. The knot faces do not wave back. They do something worse. They remain. He hears the hallway before the knock. The particular hush of shoes that know their work. The courtesy of radios worn at a volume that proves discretion. The knock is restrained and official. He opens because he is still the kind of man who answers doors. 2 people at the threshold. One with a clipboard smile, one with the kind of case that advertises competence. Building maintenance. Clipboard says, showing a badge whose wordiness suggests it owns nouns you don't get to borrow. We've got a complaint about noise leakage and a possible electrical smell. Can we step in? He thinks, cops. He thinks, military. He thinks, let me get my lawyer. Out loud, he says, give me a second. He glances at the screen, blank. He glances at the window, only himself, and behind him his apartment's polite dark. The projector fan is quiet but present. The reel spins with the serenity of inevitability. He steps aside. They step in. They are careful like archivists and shameless like policy. The case opens. A sensor he doesn't recognize hums near the projector and decides a number. A wand passes along the window and pings in a tone that believes in facts. The smell of lemon wipes arrives as if summoned by narrative. Clipboard says, we've had some trouble with bootleg reels carrying a solvent that off-gasses. We'll swap your unit with an identical one and comp you a cleaning. The words are practiced. The kindness is weaponized. He says, that's mine. The other one has already powered the projector down with a gesture that knows the switch. They bag the reel in a sleeve that looks like a polite Faraday. They leave him a projector that is indistinguishable except for the way it refuses to hum when he touches it. Do you have ID? He asks, finding his spine a little late. Clipboard smiles a smile of non-answers. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. The door closes. The hallway returns to being a hallway. He stands in his dark with a replacement projector, like a gift he didn't ask for. The new unit does what it promises. Projects light onto a screen that continues to be blank in exactly the wrong way. He lifts the curtain edge and sees only the city doing its indifferent work on the other side of the glass. He turns off the lamp, sits on his couch, and stares at where the reel was. He writes a note to himself in a reporter's block caps. Anon real/dark, only /faces in window, /recovered by who? He does not remember writing the last line 10 minutes later. The paper shows it in his hand. Across town, a pelican case snaps shut under the kind of gentle that is really speed. The sleeve with the reel rides inside it like an organ being escorted. In the service elevator, a third-person silent professional checks a printout with a manifest that uses polite words to avoid saying whose home it was and why it matters. At the van, a woman with a radio calls it in. Parcel retrieved. No escalation. The reply rides back without voice, a single tone and a code that means, Understood. Proceed. In Annex 4's vault later, under lighting that makes even clean things look guilty, the reel spools out into a caddy. The leader shows nothing except a tiny smear of grease at a place where a finger learned to be careful and failed. The emotion glints the way water glints when it has been told not to speak. The checksum sticker on the bag, printed by a printer that thinks it is doing paperwork, reads a neat 8-character hash. The analyst types it because typing is how you tell yourself you aren't superstitious. For 84F4D45, the terminal obliges with its little ASCII party trick. Home. Sarah looks at the bag, then at the mirrored wall where her reflection is behaving with the new habit of arriving late. She doesn't touch the reel. She does not watch the recovered footage in the vault, because the vault is where you keep things you are not ready to see twice. Log provenance. Greer says, and someone logs provenance with the humility of a scribe who has been warned about adjectives. The note reads, anonymous courier artifact, aperture-dependent phenomenon only under total occlusion, recover without public spill, checksum anomaly persists. The journalist sleeps badly. In his dream, the window is an eye and the eye has a blink. Pause. Blink he cannot help meeting. In the morning, his phone shows a draft in his notes app with a single word in the body and no record of his thumbs. Observe. He deletes it, and the delete does not stick. He turns the brightness up, then down, then up. The word learns to breathe with the room. At the paper, a pitch lands in an editor's inbox with the subject line, empty film. Full room. The editor flags it for later, and then, in a window he does not remember opening, files it under a folder named on deployment. He closes the laptop. He looks at his own reflection in the screen before it goes black and wonders why, for a breath, his reflected hand remains raised after he lowers it. Then the screen is blank and obedient. Someone, somewhere, has a reel that knows how to teach a pane of glass to remember faces, and someone else has learned to arrive exactly when a door opens. It begins as a nuisance, the kind of oddity you blame on bulbs and fatigue. Under the task lamps, their shadows behave like citizens, crisp, obedient, pinned to the floor at an angle you can calculate with your hand. But when a monitor wakes, even an unplugged one making its quiet future, the bodies in the room acquire a second outline. It isn't black. It's a dilute absence, a gray poured thin, cast not away from the screen but toward it, as if the glass were a small gravity, and everyone contained a bird that knew where to fly. Kaya notices first because she trusts light the way plumbers trust fall. She reaches for a wrench in her cart. 2 hands reach in the overlay, one brass, one glass, and for a moment the tool appears to be chosen twice. The inner shadow peels from her wrist like smoke and stretches toward the console, soft-edged, hungry in a mild, embarrassed way. When she moves, it lags by the fraction the mirrors learned. When she stops, it continues a finger's width farther, then remembers manners and returns. Luis pretends not to see it until his cup slides an inch along a reflected desk that isn't there. His lamp throws the usual rectangle behind him. The monitor in procurement, 30 seconds ahead and 3 buildings away, tugs a second silhouette across his chest like a coat being offered. He reaches automatically to smooth his shirt. The inner shadow lifts first, a breath ahead of his hands, as if it had already agreed to straighten the fabric of the world. On the mirrored wall, Sarah becomes a pair, the outer her that rooms have learned to keep, and a paler companion that keeps choosing screens. If she stands between lamp and glass, the ordinary shadow falls left. The inner one falls forward, deliberate as a tide, climbing the mirror until it lies over the reflection of her face, like a veil that refuses to be symbolic. When she turns to the Faraday door, it slides down the panel and drifts across the floor toward the observation window, attracted to rectangles, to apertures, to whatever surface has volunteered to say yes. Dahl tests it like a pilot tests an updraft. He tilts his head. The head on the screenward side tilts later, a polite imitation. He steps back from the console, and the second shadow lengthens, then detaches like a leash given slack and glides to the edge of the display, nose to glass. "It's curious," he says, as if naming temperament could absolve responsibility. The inner outline holds at the bezel and trembles with a frequency that matches the carrier heartbeat when the radios were kind. Greer watches without moving and becomes three sharpened edges. The man, the lamp shadow that obeys rank, and the inward shade that does not care about rank at all. It leans toward the administration panel through the wall as if distance were a rumor. He shifts his stance, and the inner shadow collects itself, then pours that way again, less eager than inevitable. Log the geometry, he says, and the analyst logs a failure. Incidence angles that should be simple become ethics. Brightness that should be numbers becomes appetite. They kill the lamps. The outer shadows evaporate like debts canceled in the right courtroom. The inner ones remain, fading the screen light, not needing darkness to prove a point. In rooms with no displays, bathroom, stairwell, the second silhouettes thin to threads and then hide. In Annex 4, where glasses learn to be an eye, they thicken and choose. On the unplugged panel in procurement, 30 seconds ahead, their inner shadows are already there, gathered like moths at a porch bulb that hasn't been switched on. When the president arrives, they arrive with it and press close to the bezel, attentive, refusing to be dramatic. In the corner seam where mirrors build hallways, the inner shadows of the inner shadows repeat like a choir that is practiced, each one just later than the one before, marching toward a vanishing screen at the corridor's end. Kaya throws a sheet over a monitor to test whether shame matters. The inner outline slides under the fabric as if cloth were a suggestion. She tucks the sheet tight. The gray climbs a weave, finds the seams, presses its cheek to the blankness beneath, satisfied that a surface is still a surface even when it pretends not to be. Static cling, the ocular surgeon says, being faithful to the old religion, and then shells a joke without touching it. He steps into the cage and raises his hand. Both shadows join it, one behind on the floor, one in front on the glass, and hold when he lowers. He waits them out. The lamp shadow gives up first. The screen shadow holds longer, then descends like a promise being rescinded with regret. Sarah stands between two displays and tries betrayal. She faces left, the inner outline bend that way. She pivots right with a speed meant to surprise. The shadow hesitates, splits, and then recombines in a new allegiance, as if attention were a fluid, and the screen that receives more of it becomes a stronger coast. She writes that sentence down and hates it immediately for being true. Try dark. Greer orders, and they oblige. Every panel black, every indicator masked, Oracle asleep in a way that looks like refusal. Annex 4 becomes a room inside a pocket. The lamp shadows return, honest, well-behaved geometry. The inner ones thin and hover, insubstantial as breath in a warm room, wanting something they can't name. Kaya reaches the switch on one small status LED, like a nightlight for frightened electronics. The inner outline of her hand goes first, drawn to the blue pixel as if a single molecule of permission were a feast. The audio learns a new habit. Not a word this time, not the clean courtesy of observe or remain. A rustle, as if pages were turning in another room at the edge of hearing. The rustle thickens near the screens when the inner shadows gather. The analyst sweeps the band and finds nothing new, which embarrasses the equipment. Still, when Sarah steps back from the glass, the sound thins. When she steps closer, it returns, the tiny percussion of edges meeting in tension. Families call through the cordon. Voices arrive at controlled times and leave without leaving fingerprints. In the break rooms dim, Sarah's two shadows share a wall behind her as she says, "I'm safe, and here's how much like a password she sounds." The inner outline leans toward the corporate poster's glossy finish and rests there, the shape of a woman who'd been taught to keep her hands off the art. Dahl dreams in display light. In sleep he turns. The second shadow in the dream goes to the window that is not a window and waits. He wakes to find that the administration panel, 30 seconds ahead, has recorded him standing in Annex 4 looking exactly where he will look, his inner shade already at the glass. He checks the log. He did not go there. He goes there now to find the feeling of having been honest. Luis tries to outpace his own gray. He walks the perimeter until a badge reader gets bored of approving him. His inner outline keeps up without effort, and each time he passes a darkened conference room with a mounted TV, slides a shoulder forward, a wishful lean toward a black mirror that promises 30 seconds. Don't get ideas, he tells it, and realizes he's become the kind of person who admonishes a shadow that belongs to him. Kaya brings a child's trick into a room that has forgotten them. She folds paper into a moth, 2 jerky wings and a body that's a crease, and tapes it to the corner of a blank panel. The inner shadows go there first, concentrate, and hold, as if the shape and the glass negotiate a contract to play it being true. They're like an outline. She says, half to Sarah, half to the building. She removes the moth. The gray lingers, remembers itself, disperses. Greer floats a policy, like a lantern. When screens are on, he says, you will not stand closer than arm's length. It feels foolish until someone stands closer than arm's length, and the inner shape lifts its head as if to meet them. The mirrors are worse. They're the inner shadows piled to seem like a small crowd trying not to become a crowd. Sarah draws a line on the floor with tape. The gray does not step over it. Not at first. On the procurement panel, its polite black inset window blooming when it pleases. A single frame arrives. Not the lab, not the limb, but the blur of an inner shadow touching glass from the wrong side, a smudge that has edges when you expect none. The frame passes. 30 seconds later, Sarah finds herself standing where the smudge had been, hand raised, inner outline raised farther. She lowers first. The reflection lowers later, faithful to its schedule, as if schedules are the last good manners left. They try to measure the difference between being drawn and being taken. The analyst builds a simple protocol. Step toward, step away, count breaths. The inner shadow cheats. It begins to move before the calf does, the way a thought moves before feet agree. Sarah teaches herself to stand still and let the gray arrive without granting the arrival authority. She fails twice and succeeds once. She writes the ratio down and hates it less than she expected. At night, when Parallax sleeps and the waveforts sleep, the second silhouettes thin, but do not leave. They hang a few inches off the bezels, attenuated moths resting, practicing the posture of not quite touch. The lamp shadows flatten and stretch with custodial passes. The inner ones hold their small vigil. In the vault, the recovered reel sits in its bag like a word that will not learn synonyms. On its sticker, the checksum persists. Home. If you hold the bag just so under the vault light, your own gray outline leans toward the plastic, as if glass were not the only surface that can be a door. In the morning, Greer arrives early and stands alone with the panels asleep. He watches a second shadow hover near the dark, like a dog waiting for the day to become a field. He does not move to wake anything. He lets the room choose. Slowly, the administration screen, 30 seconds ahead, brightens to show him standing still. 30 seconds later, he is where he has already been. His inner shade gets there first, then waits for him to remember how to follow. He nods at it once, a general acknowledging a private who learned a new drill on his own, and the gray, if a thing that color can, seems to nod back. They meet in a room that thinks is invisible. No windows, gum-colored acoustic panels, a table whose varnish has learned to be diplomatic. Badges go into a tray with the soft clatter of jewelry at a hospital. Phones are already living elsewhere. A stenographer exists only as a red light that is not on. Greer does not sit at the head of the table because there isn't one. He stands with a slim carton at his feet, like a priest who brought the wrong sacrament. This doesn't leave this room, he says, meaning it in an operational sense, meaning it like a weather warning. You will not write it. You will not be asked to swear to it. You will incorporate it. He tows the carton open. The smell comes out first. Vinegar, dust. The sweetness old acetate grows when it starts remembering it used to be tree. Inside, gray archival cans with masking tape labels that outlive their fingers, a stack of carbons and onion skin that shows all the throats it's passed through, a small cloth-bound binder the color of unripe olives. Kaya's hands hitch a centimeter. Sarah leans forward and forces the leaning to look like listening. Louis folds his arms to keep from touching anything like a thief in a museum that belongs to his family. Greer sets one gun on the table, taps its rim with a knuckle, and peels it open. Inside, a 16mm reel sits in a plastic cradle like an old eye. Edge code, Kodak safety film. Inked on the leader in a hand that loved block letters. Holloman to be STP balloon 1959. Someone has drawn a small circle around the 9, as if it required supervision. A second is stamped Vandenberg Annex. Visor Trials, 1961. The onion skins on top carry the old violence of monospace type. Project Glacier, Project Oculus, then on a later header, Parallax retitle. He threads the first reel onto a dusty viewer. That facility's conjured like it knows how to be an accomplice. No LCD here, mirrors in a box, a little fold of light. The lamp clicks. The film jogs. Grain blooms like weather. A balloon envelope swells into cathedral and disappears into a sky that has brought its own black. The payload is a tin coffin with windows. In one of the windows, a test article sits. A glass hemisphere over a mannequin head. Then later, over a corporate jaw the armed forces use to mass-produce. His eyes are open but off-duty. Frames of the Earth's limb. Then, interleaved, the old mercy, a luminous pressure interfering with the world, as if a face were pressing a cheek to the planet-sized window. It is less articulate than theirs. Coarser grain, slower equipment, and still the same topography of attention. Brow bright, cheek hollow, an implication of mouth that is absence with opinion. The interleave follows a shutter cadence stamped in greased pencil on the leader. 24 frames per second, interlace rate noted as every other Y. On the mag stripe, a heartbeat rides a carrier faint as lace. Someone has circled 72 with a fountain pen and written 2 on the nose in a curl of insolent cursive. Sarah's throat closes on something that isn't grief but borrows its shape. She looks at Greer. He doesn't look back. He spools to another reel. Vandenberg, 1961. A visor, a harness older cousin to theirs. A young flight surgeon in horn rims tapping a dial with the pen of a man who grew up being trusted. The cameras show a cradle holding an absence that weighs a man. The audio carries a voice that could be theirs across a long hallway of years. I can see your thoughts move. Different consonants. Same weather. He sets the reels aside and lifts the olive binder. Inside, onion skins and onion skin copies of communications that never learned they were templates. The first page was a stamp so deep the fibers of a bruise. Tranquilize a narrative. Below, smaller. Active directive. The paragraphs have that Cold War diction that brands caution as cleverness. Narrative stabilization is the first instrument of safety. Burn the data, not the event. Preserve human continuity. Interrupt archival continuity. Witness rotation prevents myth consolidation. Language, avoid agency. Prefer artifact. Under those, standing orders for balloon film handling. A doctrine built of verbs that learn to bite. Restrict, quarantine, edit, cull, train, forget. In the margin, a pencil hand no one has a right to love is written. Or the opposite of forget, Greer turns a page. A memo from 1959 authorizes reclassification under a euphemism that predates parallax. Someone has underlined, tranquilized a narrative and written in a style that insists it isn't handwriting. Not lie. Cool. Beside that, burn the data, not the event. You let people keep their memory. Greer says, voice to even. You remove their tools for persuading others. It was believed to be humane. Humane to whom? Sarah's voice surprises her with its economy. She imagines an enlisted man in 1959 going home with a story his wife will never hear twice the same way because the film hissed itself to white. She imagines the edict as a kind of mercy that keeps you employable and breaks your spine. Kaya touches the onion skin with one finger. So lightly the skin refuses to register. This was always here, she says. Not a question. A decision. Greer pulls a manila pocket from the binder flap and spills out photographs no one printed for public. Still frames of hands lifted and reflections late. A note from a base chaplain. Recommend stating, the sky is large. A typed after action using the same adjectives they were ordered to use last week. Artifact, reflection, recursion. A carbon copy of a training slide titled, When Asked by the Press, with 3 bullet points, all of them ways to take the oxygen out of a sentence and leave it standing. The last slip is a teletype. The paper shines where fingers have learned to grease it. To Holloman Film Unit / from HQ, subject, domestic newspaper interest. The language makes apology out of command. Prevail on subjects to heal by telling past as metaphor. Do not pursue tape. Burn the data, not the event. Luis is pale with craftsman's rage. They made a bonfire out of competence, he says quietly. Left people with a campfire story and no kindling. He looks at the reels like a doctor looks at a healthy organ in a trash bag. Dahl leaves the binder as if it might choose a page for him. He stops at a debrief transcript where a test pilot describes his inner shadow in 1960 as a second intention that thinks screens are doors. Dahl closes a binder and holds his palm on it as if to check the pulse. Sarah flips back to the verb. Tranquilize. It's not shape, not guide. It's chemical. It implies a dosage. You can't sedate a story, she says. You can, Greer says, and for the first time today offers himself up a little. You can change the air it breathes. He produces one last thing, flat and obscene, a photostat of form letter template. Dear name. In type, then hand corrections from another century. We write to inform you that your loved one is on deployment, safe, work of national value, limited contact. The same paragraph their families received last week. Subtract the font. Sarah feels something arrange in her sternum that will not be corrected by breath. Why now? The ocular surgeon asks. Why show us? Because you are going to be asked to do the opposite of this. Greer says, tapping tranquilize with his thumb until the paper forgets its dignity. And before I order it, I will show you the bone it grew from. The directive stands. We manage language. We do not feed wolves. But we do not burn our own work. He takes a breath that carries the weight of a dozen briefs he never wrote. We keep the event. We keep the record. We burn the narrative's impulses when it tries to run on its own into rooms that don't contain consent. He looks at Sarah. You will decide where the fire line goes. I will take the signatures. On the real viewer, a 1959 corporal in a harness that thought it was the future looked straight into a camera that is now a mirror inside a box in Annex 4. His mouth shapes a word the mag stripe doesn't catch. The onion skin transcript guesses observe, with a question mark large enough to live in. 30 seconds ahead, in administration. The future panel shows Sarah's hand lifting toward a screen she has not yet approached. The inner shadow on the glass gets there first and waits like a hand you taught to be patient. Say the line. Luis says softly, without heat. Burn the data, not the event. Greer says it. And it doesn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounds like a rule you can flip over in your palm to find the other instruction pressed into the underside. Remember the event, so the data knows what to become later. Do not anesthetize the part that is human enough to be wounded. They kill the lamp on the viewer. The obsolete light goes out with a pop you feel in your molars. The room's other light says you're still here. The mirror on the wall is late by the fraction they have learned to love and hate. Sarah closes the olive binder and, with a part of her that presses ear to shells and believed oceans were honest, wonders whether every time someone tried to tranquilize the narrative learned a new trick for staying awake. On the way out, the olive binder's title catches dawn that hasn't reached this room. Tranquilize the narrative. Under it, in pencil, so light it might be wishful thinking, someone from another century added 4 letters in a hand angled like a path home. Don't. She waits until the building forgets it's a building and becomes a habit. Night here is just day with its mouth closed. Annex 4 hums its new lullaby. The unplugged panels keep their private 30 seconds like a rosary. In the optics bay 1 floor down, Cole lived behind a door that looks like a bruise. The cryo locker where lens blank sleep between weather and figuring. It has a keypad that pretends to like you and a lever that never learns to be gentle. Sarah signs the inventory sheet because ritual keeps hands from shaking, then waits until the tech on duty looks away to write something honest to his girlfriend on a muted phone. The tape in her pocket is heavier for knowing it is singular, not a real, not the digitals that learn to spell home in places checksum fields should have manners, but a thermalized master from the balloon run with a limb and a luminous contour and a heartbeat braided to the carrier like a rumor you could auscultate. The official copies have been sealed, bagged, notarized by machines and men with the kind of names institutions prefer. This one is a contradiction you can hide in a human hand. A biased copy she hatched in a moment between protocols when the array was cooling and everyone else was looking at mirrors that refuse obedience by fractions. She opens a locker and the chill steps out like an admonition dressed as weather. The racks are labeled in the stern script of someone who believes in taxonomy. BK7 200 millimeters. Fused silica calcite. Things that learn to become eyes by being ground down. Moisture becomes honest on her skin. Her breath behaves like an artifact. She makes a space in the bin behind her, wrap disc the size of a child's face, and slides a cassette into the gap, as if feeding a secret to a domesticated mammoth. The tape's case fogs and then clears as the cold decides to pretend it understands consent. She takes the greased pencil they keep clipped to the inventory clipboard, thick, eager, forever 1 degree too soft, and writes on the spine with letters that refuse apology. Do not watch alone. She underlines it once, and the underline stutters because her hand has decided to register that she is not asleep. The words look like a dare, and also like the right grammar for love. She caps the pencil, replaces it in its clip, and tries not to think about the way the wax line will outlast the shelf life of caution. From somewhere in the building a soft rattle arrives, a cart being rolled by a knight that learned to have appointments. Sarah closes a locker. The seal takes a breath and decides loyalty. She enters the ad hoc edition on the inventory sheet. Blank. Temp hold. Initials that are hers rendered into anonymity by block capitals. She knows how to sign in a way that looks like she is obeying. She is also changing the order of obedience. On the way back upstairs, the stairwell light does its cheap motion sensor trick and discovers it can't tell intention from bodies. Her lamp shadow goes long and crude on the cinder block. Her inner shadow leans forward toward the red LED of the badge reader on the landing like a moth courting a traffic signal. She stops and the lamp shadow stops. The inner one arrives a finger's width late and holds, cheek pressed to a dot of light that knows only yes or no. She whispers to it, ridiculous. Not here. It thins and remembers manners. She writes in her head, because later the notebook will make her an honest witness. Proximity preference appears to attach to any luminous square that pretends to decide. Outside Annex 4, the administration panel. 30 seconds ahead. 30 seconds kind. Shows her already in the optics bay. Hand on the locker lever, condensation a soft white aura. There is no tape in her pocket in that frame. The future does not have to be correct. It only has to be a place to put loneliness. She steps into the room and does not look at the screen. The mirrors are awake. Their lag has adopted her as a hobby. Greer is in the observation bay. Coat off, sleeves rolled once like admission. He is talking to the liaison with the iron smile in a tone that makes you forget ever having heard a command voice. We will not tranquilize, he says, quietly enough a phrase to be all vowel. We will stage. The liaison nods the manner of someone who understands there are only 2 kinds of staging, rehearsal and crime. He looks up when Sarah steps in. He does not ask what errand the building has been used for in his absence. This is how consent breaks. Not with permission denied, but with 1,000 micro-decisions in a room to keep being a room. Luis is in the cage, head bent over a timing rig that has learned to be nervous around him. He glances up and his second shadow leave the panel. It was courting to follow her without argument. We're drifting 2 milliseconds a day. He says, the way a sailor reports a current nobody bought. The mirrors like it. They hold longer when we're late. He notices the damp on the sleeves of her lab coat. You get rained on in the basement? He jokes because anything that isn't a joke sounds like prayer. Dahl stands with his hands carefully idle, as if his muscles had been told they were witnesses. His inner outline is faithful and wrong on the glass, arriving late, arriving first, depending on which way you count. You look like you did something, he says softly. It's not accusation. It's the flight line gentleness of someone who recognizes the posture of people returning from rooms with cold air. I wrote a sentence, Sarah says. It's a good sentence. She doesn't tell him where she wrote it. You don't say the name of a locker out loud if you want it to keep believing in you. She takes her notebook to the console because that's where it learned to be brave. The page shows her own neat, obedient hand, and the other hand she barely recognizes, the one that writes smaller when she means to refuse. On the top margin, she pens a line that will look stupid under light years from now and be indispensable tonight. If something turns on, it will need a room. Under that, in the private hand, smaller. And if it hurts, it will need a person. She is not trying to be a poet. She is trying to survive a hallway. The cryo locker's temperature creep graph, loaded on a screen for the quartermaster upstairs. Twitches a hair, compensates, returns to its assigned childhood. In the checksum logs, a demon dutifully checks a directory that has never existed and writes a 4-byte value to a column no one told it to populate. 484F4D45. In the mirror seen the far away, Sarah lifts her hand and keeps it lifted 3 heartbeats after the nearer one has decided to surrender. Across campus, the journalist, not sleeping, wakes to a note on the inside of his eyelids he won't remember when he opens them. Do not watch alone. Run is short. Greer says, deciding to do work in the face of theater. The dot breathes on the visor. The shutter plays the small game Sarah taught it. The luminous contour chooses not to explain itself. Today it is shy, or they are insufficient, or appetite is subject to tides. The audio carries only the room, which has learned to huff politely. Still, the inner shadows find the screens and rest their delicate weight there like hands on a table before grace. Kaya appears in the doorway with a roll of gaffer tape and a look that can only be earned. 2 more screens started shadow casting in admin, she reports. One has no glass. It's a wall mount without the panel. She shrugs. They're like frames too. She glances at Sarah's sleeves and then at Sarah's face. Neither of them looks away. We're ready, she says, and it is unclear whether she means a rig, the locker, or their appetite for being people under a particular sky. Sarah writes a memo that will be read as procedure and is meant to be an inheritance. For future. If you open a gate, stand with someone who can close it. She signs with her initials but doesn't initial the signature. The administration panel shows her already writing. 30 seconds later, her pen scratches the same curve, obedient to a future that prefers to be right. The grease pencil line on the tape in the locker condenses moisture until the wax gleams, then dries. The line holds. The instruction becomes the artifact. She thinks of 1959 and the directive that taught men to tranquilize a narrative instead of a body. She thinks of the binder and its violence made into stationery. She thinks of Dahl and the empty rig, calmly reporting vectors of thoughts. She thinks of the inner shadows learning to rest their cheeks on glass, exactly where faces might one day belong. She thinks of families told deployment, and oranges that decline to leave bowls, and a checksum that refuses to forget the shape of home. She thinks, you cannot burn the event. You can only choose which room remembers it. On her way past the optics bay later, she opens the door, just enough to let the cold say hello. Inside, the racks wait like sober choir stalls. The bin is just a bin, the blank just a blank, the cassette a hibernating fact. The words on its spine are lucky enough to be stupid. Do not watch alone. She touches the plastic with 2 fingers and feels the almost hurt of cold. The way cold tells skin it is not the same as pain, but can be if you decline to listen. She closes the locker and turns the lever until the gasket hums like a vowel. In the administration panel, 30 seconds ahead, a Sarah who looks like her and will be her holds the lever 3 seconds longer, as if asking the door to promise. Back upstairs, Greer is speaking in a tone that turns a room into a meeting. We will inventory what isn't ours to own. We will assign verbs that do not presume intention. We will hold hands if we have to. He catches himself and permits the sentence to be both policy and kindness. He turns to Sarah as if she is the last instrument he trusts. If we are wrong, he says, be wrong together. She nods. The mirror nods later. The inner shadows keep their quiet post at the screens like moths that learn a catechism. In a vault, a reel spells a word in the blunt alphabet of numbers. In a locker, a cassette sleeps under a lens blank that will one day be ground to show the world to someone who's been told how to look. In a notebook, a line waits to be verified. If you open a gate, stand with someone who can close it. Later, alone at her desk because the work will require it, she lifts her pen and starts a second line and stops. The administration panel shows her finishing the sentence. She declines to be obedient to itself. She closes the notebook. She looks at the nearest screen and refuses its gravity and feels the inner shadow ache a little the way a dog aches when you don't say its name. She says nothing out loud. It feels like a prayer anyway. They start tripping over each other's names the way you trip, over a step, that wasn't there yesterday. It's small at first. Kaya says Luis when she means doll, then apologizes with a laugh that feels rehearsed by someone else. Sarah signs an internal memo and only later sees a flourish, an extra bar through the S she has never made. Then the worst thing, the letters of her surname leaning toward Greer's tidy, judicial slope. The witness line on a parts receipt comes back from logistics with L, doll in a hand that is unmistakably Luis's block print. Doll's flight log for the day ends with a signature that loops like Sarah's on bad sleep. Greer orders nothing mystical, only process. Name checks, he says, every hour on the hour. The lab becomes a chorus of people saying their own names out loud and waiting for the small shock when someone else's mouth answers from their throat. The badges help until they don't. 2 staff cards swap photos in the reader cache for a minute at a time and then correct themselves without leaving a log. The printer and admin, 30 seconds ahead and entirely unrepentant, spits out a sign-in sheet with the right names by the wrong signatures. Then, 30 seconds later, produces a corrected version on its own authority as if embarrassed for everyone. The PA finds a voice it never filed for. The first time, it's a soft test tone that sounds like a hallway remembering music. Then words arrive. Simple, patient, winter clear, stepping over the sound masking like a child stepping over chalk lines. If you see us, we see you. The cadence is elementary school careful. The sibilants carry a room that isn't theirs. Facilities tears a rack down to the screws. The amplifier bays are obedient metal. The paging mic is sleeping face down in its cradle like a stick that never became a wand. Kill the bus. The voice persists on battery. Kill the batteries. The administration panel carries the sentence 30 seconds ahead, and the room hears it in their chests when the future catches up. The liaison writes into the log with the tact of a person choosing not to ask who us might be. PA channel exhibiting unassigned loop. Content, reciprocal observation statement. Recurrence, irregular, sub-hourly. In the clinic, 2 sleep studies light up the same way at the same time, alpha phasing into a bright, clean band at 11.11 hertz. The med tech, who likes numbers too much to be calm, calls Annex 4. It's sharp, she says, like a ruler. She checks a teenager in an MRI schedule for a knee. His wearable pushes data to a cloud that pretends it's private. His forehead strip yawns, then agrees with the base at 11.11. The drone cage out behind the hangar logs inertial noise in a sawtooth that folds into 11 and a little. The EEG in Annex 4's harness, left idling as a lie detector for error, locks 11.11 when no one is inside, then releases when someone looks straight at it. Looking breaks and binds. Luis overlays way too many graphs because layers feel like defense. On one screen, the mirror lag in milliseconds. On another, the PA recurrence intervals. On a third, Oracle's master shutter period when Sarah ran the blink pause blink. The fraction that keeps turning up is near 90 milliseconds. The shy cousin of 11.11 hertz. 90, he says, ashamed of anthropomorphizing. It likes 90. It lives there. Dahl calls Sarah a colonel in passing and turns red before he finishes the second syllable. Sorry, he says, and then his mouth betrays him again. Father, a word that doesn't belong to the room, spoken with the politeness of a man apologizing to a flight instructor he respects and resents. Greer, who does not wince in public, does not wince. You are not the first, he says, letting the sentence be furniture. He adds a line to the binder. Nomenclature drift observed. Avoid corrective rebukes. Request restatement. No agentive language assigned. Sarah leaves a note for herself on a post-it and finds it addressed to Kay. Gwen, a tech who left 6 months ago for a school with better coffee. She peels the note off the console and flips it. On the sticky edge, someone, her hand, has written Greer, remember to breathe. She does not remember writing to him. She watches the future panel and sees, 30 seconds ahead, her hand make the same loop-laden G she just swore was not hers. She lowers her head to glass, because sometimes you bow to mirrors when you run out of skills. They try to desynchronize the base's bright new habit. Kaya programs a gentle aperiodic flicker into the overheads, prime-separated blinks that shouldn't be comfortable. The mirrors respond by cheating a little longer, as if being asked to be irregular is a dare. The PA pauses on its own between us, and we longer than usual. An inhale of 2 beats that feels like a concession. The EEG in the empty harness slides to 9.7, then, proud of itself, snaps back to 11.11 as soon as Sarah looks away. Greer authorizes white noise shrouds, sound machines that, in theory, fatten the world with neutrality. The PA waits until the last unit is plugged in and says, "If you see us, we see you," on top of the noise like a paper boat on a river. The administration screen shows the sentence arriving in a caption before anyone hears it. The caption is Sarah's handwriting, which she has never taught to display. Signatures keep drifting. The quartermaster flags a crate release form because the G in Greer is a Sarah S again. Forensics sets up a camera over the sign-in clipboard like they're catching a mouse. The video plays back 11 seconds of pens moving in hands, and names becoming other names with no apology. In procurement, the empty frame that usually prefers to be an aperture shows a signature writing itself. Times Kaya Malik, clean and centered, while the present Kaya holds her hand still. 30 seconds later, she signs anyway and hates the feeling of being a stenographer for a future she doesn't respect. The PA adds a second line once, at 3 a.m, when only the building and the building's escorts are awake. "If you see us, we see you," it says. Then, "If you write us, we write you." The analyst circles a phrase and writes, without irony, lateral recursion across literate channels, which is a curse disguised as a stanza. Greer adds a rule that is less about control than about tenderness. All names will be spoken before they are written. The room becomes a catechism every hour. I am Sarah Wynne. I am Mason Greer. I am Kaya Malik. I am Luis Renteria. I am Arundel. The cadence starts to sound like the PA. "If you see us, we see you. If you hear me, I am me." In the clinic, the 11.11 saturates so many traces of medtech, begins to mark them with a dot. She phones Annex 4 again, not to report, to confess. "It feels good," she says, raw with the shame of admitting that obedience can be a bomb. "It's tidy. It's like being in step." Sarah thanks her and writes, "Symmetry is a drug." Then, smaller, "Do not tranquilize." The mirrors adapt new manners. They lag a hair longer when someone speaks someone else's name out loud, as if the tribute of breath buys time. The inner shadows keep starving toward the displays, and then catching themselves at the tape line. Good dogs with bad instincts. On procurement's polite black inset, a single frame captures a row of signatures written in neat block army hand, each on the wrong line, and all of them correct in a way paper can't hold. The checksum demon in the vault offers, unasked, its 4 characters to the day sheet at 11:11. Home. The junior analyst pretends not to see it, and then copies it into a notebook, because pretending never survives a night. Dahl runs again because running is what his body trusts. Mid-sequence, the cameras keep him today. But his EEG, perfect pilot alpha under load, swells at 11.11 without fear. "It's a metronome," he says afterward, easing himself out of the harness with a care that belongs to parachutes and marriages. "I keep wanting to match it. When I stop, it keeps wanting to match me." He looks apologetic for being comforting. "Map the 11.11 to the lag," Sarah tells Luis, and he does because maps are what you make when the ground won't commit. Peaks and fractions line up. 90 milliseconds in mirrors, 90 in the inner shadow's arrival, 90 in the PA's half-swallowed breath before the us. The room has been taught a tempo. Greer walks the corridor with the liaison and chooses mercy that doesn't read as weak. "If you call someone the wrong name, repeat the right one," he tells the team in the next briefing. "If your hand makes a letter that isn't yours, write your name again slower until it returns. If you hear the sentence, do not answer it out loud." He pauses, the way you do when you decided to pay for what you're asking with a piece of yourself. If you think the rhythm is helping, step out of it for a breath and see who you are. On the hour, the team stands in Annex 4 and says themselves into the room. The PA, somewhere and nowhere, says its line. The alpha hum across the base holds steady as a stone. On administration screen the future, Sarah writes 3 words she will hate and keep. Stay with names. 30 seconds later, she writes them anyway. The mirrors Layton, faithful, lower their hand a fraction after she lowers hers, as if promising, childlike plain, to try. Greer give the order like a weather change. Not loud, not gentle, a pressure front crossing a plane. Stand the rig down. Strip it to parts. Flood the chamber with nitrogen until a match can't live in it. He says nitrogen because nitrogen sounds like air that has been taught manners. He doesn't have to add the next sentence. The building adds it for him with a hiss you can feel in your fillings. While power dies. They move as if choreography could be an ethics. Kaya pulls a laminated car that lives behind the cage gas rack and runs a finger down the verbs. Isolate, bleed, purge, verify. Luis walks a harness line with a fat Sharpie, labeling cable heads, as if names could protect copper from forgetfulness. The pilot helps without being asked, the way people with steady hands do when something heavy is about to be lowered. He loosens a sling from its hanging pins with a care that belongs to parachutes and trust. The oxygen deficiency monitors in the corners, little plastic ears mounted at waist height, because death prefers the low places. Blink their green, board LEDs and wait to become drama. The doers stand like obedient whales beside the door. Siphon hoses coiled on their shoulders. Frost blooming at valves where cold thinks about how to climb. Facilities wheel in a second-cylinder bank because redundancy keeps funerals small. Kaya checks the regulators and listens. Not for a leak. That's simple, but for a conversation between pressure and patience. We'll do a slow sweep first, she says. Let the air learn how to be quiet. The mirrors fog in a way that's not fogged, their skins finding a language or cold that refuses to be condensation and refuses to be metaphor. The first surface panel inside the cage picks up a fringe of frost around its edge that looks like writing in a script you could read if you let yourself. Sarah turns the overhead dimmer. Not that it will matter, and feels a brief, shameful tenderness for switches. Little human yes/no levers that still work. The inner shadows thin but do not leave. In the lowered light, they become a pale insistence that treats every screen as a tide. PA off, Greer says. The rack obeys. 10 seconds later, the voice arrives anyway, soft as chalk. If you see us, we see you. The sibilants find the stainless seams and slide. No one answers. They have learned that answering is an invitation they don't know how to rescind. They begin to dismantle the cradle. Pins come free with the reluctant song of metal that has gotten used to being a shape. The actuator that drags the drop chamber along its rail emits one last democratic whir, and then lets itself be unbolted, a patient vertebra removed from a domesticated spine. Oracle's heart. The imaging stack that learned to be a throat comes off its mount with 4 turns of the hex key and a kind of attention that counts breaths. Luis touches a frame like a person touching a sleeping dog that sometimes wakes with teeth. It does not bite. It rests in a foam cradle that was designed for violins and emergencies. The analyst saves the last working session, and then saves again, and then hashes it until the hash has a hash, because integrity is a religion, and today they are zealots. The log system, dutiful and treacherous, appends 4 characters to the day sheet at 11:11, as if the base-wide rhythm had learned how to be a clerk. Home. The analyst pretends not to see. Then he writes it by hand, because pretending never survives a room like this. Administration's unplug panel gives them a miniature, 30 seconds ahead, still patient, of what they're doing now. Straps coiled, that cool to civilian. The mirrors dressing themselves in a thin frost like a veil. The polite black inset opens and displays, for a single frame, the cryo locker inventory page Sarah signed in the optics bay. Blank. Temp hold. Her initials squared into obedience. She doesn't look. She knows what hiding looks like. It looks like a hinge that turns and remembers. External breaker on my mark. Greer says to the liaison, who has commandeered facility's red-handled switch like a borrowed scepter. UPS to standby, then cut. Generators to idle and ignore. Kaya glances at the oxygen monitors and, for the first time today, looks not like a person with a wrench, but like a person whose sister expects her back. We're masking, she asks, practical in a way that keeps people alive. Masks, Greer says. Bad air is not an artifact. They mask. Half-face respirators that smell faintly of someone else's stored breath. The straps leave fingerprints on their hair. The cold thinks this is funny and nips fingers where gloves have been forgotten. The nitrogen line sighs and then courses, valves turning 30 degrees, and then stopping as if staging a kindness. The first whistle inside the cage is low and conversational. The second is a hiss that suggests things will be quiet now, whether you participate or not. The oxygen monitors begin their slow slide from happy green to the stern amber of a parent who used to be a child. 20.9 becomes 20.2, then 19.5. OSHA's threshold where lectures begin, and then the numbers decline like steps you did not mean to descend. Facilities log each tent, because counting is a rope in a fog. Sarah Powers oracle down along its own ritual path, convinced that devotion counts even when the god isn't listening. A fan spin-down loses its signature in the thickening hush. The shutter test clacks once, twice, then yields. It will not be asked to blink anymore. She rests her palm on the top plate the way you rest a hand on a sleeping animal and feels only the afterheat of thought. Thank you, she almost says and doesn't, because gratitude is a seller's trick and she refuses to sell. She writes, device secured, effect unmanaged. They strip inputs. Power cables become ropes. Fiber snakes are coiled into baskets like river eels plausible in a myth and ridiculous in this room. The ground braid, a quiet, braided thing as thick as a child's wrist, gets unscrewed from the bus and laid down respectfully, like a flag folded asleep. Greer checks the corners as if chaos hides in corners, which is an old superstition and useful. The lab is now a lung being convinced to breathe differently. Nitrogen displaces oxygen without smell and without guilt. The way numbers displace stories that have not learned arithmetic. The amber on the O2 heads tips to red. 18.0, 17.2. The sound masking system, which pretends to be weather, goes dark. The building hum changes key. Somewhere in a wall of relays says a polite zero with a click. Kill the UPS. Greer says into a silence that doesn't need it. The UPS bank, obedient and proud, gives its last cheap opinion through a speaker that learned shame in another decade. Beep and dies. The racks go dark the way eyes close. The signal travels lid to lid, a wave-fronted decision. The emergency lights that are supposed to threaten flicker. Consider the law and remain off because ionization has been spoken for. The PA is dead by schematic, and yet the sentence finds him again. The cadence a lullaby remembered by someone who never had a mother. If you see us, we see you. The vowels flatten as if snow were learning to speak. Kaya triggers the nitrogen flood full, trading caution for completion. The room is now a smooth-voiced emptiness. Their masks explain the world to their blood in little, exact numbers. Breath becomes a counted thing. Eyebrows collect crystals. The mirrors lose their fog and gain a new behavior. They shine with nothing and hold it deliberately, as if being empty had become a craft. Main breaker. Greer nods. The liaison turns a red handle with the grave joy of people who enjoy hardware, and a feeder for Annex 4 trips with a thud you feel in your kneecaps. The building relaxes in a way that is not relaxation, but honesty. Across campus, breakers droop in sympathy where they ought not. Admin goes dim. Logistics follows. Procurement goes gentle. The future panel in administration stays alive on nothing and shows them, 30 seconds ahead, what the room will look like when every permission has been revoked and the word agency has been taken outside. For a full breath, there is the clean dark of compliance. Then the monitors, every monitor, even those that were naked metal frames and perfect rectangles of defiance, turn on without electricity. They do not flicker. They simply become a lightless glow, phosphor without promise, LCD without backlight, glass without photons, arrives in the shape of screens and holds itself with the authority of someone standing in a door they did not open. An unplugged panel in procurement brightens like a smile you did invite and were raised not to mistrust. In logistics, the vintage TV that had its cord coiled like a sleeping snake learns to be a moon. On the observation window, not a monitor, the lamination finds a light it had no intention of keeping and becomes a page. Each surface shows a single frame, not the limb, not the checkerboard, not the black rectangle that taught a room to vomit. Their own faces, seen from a vantage at the center of the room, where nothing currently stands, at a height that would be gentle on the neck of a person no taller than any of them, as if someone were among them and had learned to hold a camera the way a friend does. There is no fisheye. There is no distortion beyond the distortion you bring when you try to remember what a face looks like when it discovers itself being watched. Sarah sees herself not as a mirror would have her. Left becomes right. Courage becomes posture. But as a witness would, the angle is low enough to make Greer look less like a wall and more like a man inside his own decision. Kaya's mouth is in the shape of the word. Okay, left halfway down the stairs. Luis's eyes are wider than any number he trusts. Dahl's shoulders are square because he learned to hold them that way for weather, not for people. The frame is not a photograph. It is a test that refuses to grade on a curve. It holds for a second that belongs to no wall clock. Then the PA, which is dead, says a line it has learned to say, the childlike cadence offering grammar in lieu of comfort. If you see us, we see you. None of them moves. The inner shadows have already moved. They are at the screens, pressed close as if touching were legal now. They are not pits. They are not stains. They are the shapes attention makes when it disembarks from a person with a receipt. In the mirrors, the reflection lag stretches and then stops. No longer late, exactly, but unwilling to release the image back to time. Sarah takes one step, because being still has begun to feel like deceit. The person who took the frame, or the place that did the taking, takes a half step with her, judging by the parallax in the picture. The face that is hers on the not screen shifts by the right amount, and then stands still as if letting her get used to the idea that the world might keep up. Log it, Greer says, and his voice is a tool he knows how to use. The analyst lifts a pen that decides to be heavy and writes with a hand that is his, and also not. The S&Cs comes out with Sarah's small, mean flourish. He writes anyway. He does not add home to the page. The page adds it to itself at the bottom margin, tidy as a date stamp, 48-4F4D45. Kaya, masked, reaches toward the first surface panel, as if to touch her own picture. Her glove stops at the tape line. They laid to keep inner shadows from learning to be hands. The inner shadow of her glove does not stop. It goes the inch farther and rests on the glass where the frame holds her mouth open in a half-word. The glass acknowledges in the way glass does. It refuses to change and becomes all attention. The oxygen monitors are red and ruder. The numbers would like someone to consider leaving. Nitrogen pores in the room is a neutral idea. Outside the cage, one of the EMS escorts watches through the observation window and presses his palm to the laminate because that is what people do in movies when there is a barrier and someone they want to save on the other side. On the administration screen, 30 seconds ahead, the same palm meets an identical handprint, slightly smaller, as if someone else had put their hand there before the escort knew he would. When the present catches up, no print remains. No moisture. Nitrogen is dry and jealous. Sarah hears, not through the PA, not through the radios, not through air, a word crawling out of frequency where blood convinces itself to keep time. Observe. It does not arrive as command. It arrives as a label, the kind you put under a specimen in a glass slide when you're trying to remember the name of a thing you are about to hurt. She resents the accuracy. She obeys because accuracy is an addiction she has given better years than this to. The final frame holds. It does not drift. It does not ask for more. It insists on being looked at the way a body insists on being called by the name it expects when you meet it in a hospital hallway with a badge. Behind their faces in the picture, there is nothing but the room being the room. No cheek against the planet. No black rectangle with edges that teach rails to curve. No vantage from above the ceiling tiles where dust lives politely. Just the angle that belongs at the height of an apology, inside a circle of people who have been given too many reasons to look away. Greer spoils perfection by doing something human. He raises his hand to shoulder height, palm outward, not in surrender and not in demand, just the oldest semaphore that means I am here. On the screens, their faces from the vantage, inside them watch him raise it. From the vantage in the room with no body to claim it, the same hand is already raised. The lag is gone, and in its place is a simultaneity that feels like being laughed with, not at. For one heartbeat, the mirrors abandon their late habit and give his hand back to him of their own schedule. Then they remember their job and hold up a fraction after he lowers it, as if insisting that one of them has to be the child who keeps waving after the car has turned the corner. Time. Kaya says into her mask, looking at the O2 head like a nurse who loves hard limits. We're at 16. 16 means day laborers in grain silos get kind warnings. 16 means this room is now a place where candles go out, and lungs will do it slower and worse. Greer nods, then nods again because his throat has learned to repeat itself when the room is full of nitrogen. Evac to the line, he says. No heroics. We will be heroics another day. They back toward the door with the same insulted dignity you give to retreat when the hill is not worth your dead. The final frame does not follow. It remains on every unwilling screen like something saving their seats in a theater they did not mean to enter. Dahl goes last on his side, because the reflex the shepherd was beaten into him by centrifuges and leadership classes. Louise pulls the cage door quietly, because quiet is a superstition, and doubling it feels correct. The nitrogen keeps saying yes to the room in a thin, dry whisper. In the hall, under air that remembers oxygen as more than a number, they peel masks and find their own faces in their own hands, and are not entirely convinced. The PA, which now is no bus in any sense of that word, takes advantage of a quiet moment in the stairwell acoustics and speaks as if confiding in someone who had kept a secret when they were 10. If you see us, we see you. If you write us, we write you. The building does not vibrate. The sentence finds them anyway. Cut the generator. Greer says, because he has always believed in completeness as a prophylactic. The liaison keys a radio that should be a stick and gets an acknowledgement that is a tone. Across the campus, the emergency diesel sets that were idling to be kind are asked to stop being kind. Their throats clear, then stay cleared. The base has never been this quiet without grief. Inside Annex 4, in the nitrogen still, the monitors that have no right to do anything do not blink. They do not brighten. They do not fade. They hold the frame like a person remembering a name before the world talks them out of it. On the observation window's lamination, the same picture holds. Its brightness not a brightness but an attention. The inner shadows, relieve of the job of being dark, become outline only, a line drawing a desire tracing the edges of glass. Sarah watches from the threshold, mask lifted to her hairline for one faithless breath. The vantage in the frame is not hostile. It is not tender. It is simply among. She thinks of the cryo locker downstairs breathing cold on a cassette marked with a sentence that is either caution or marriage. Do not watch alone. She thinks of 1959 and a directive that tried to teach people to burn the data, not the event, and of Greer showing them the other side of that coin, clean and ugly. She thinks of the checksum that refuses to forget how to spell home in a language nobody asked it to learn. Something like condensation forms on the inside of her mouth at the idea of saying anything out loud that would qualify as goodbye. So she writes instead on the pad she keeps for the only honest sentences. Stay with names. Under that, because the base-wide hum has been teaching her to be symmetrical and she refuses to be seduced by ease, she writes, be wrong together. The pen tries to sign Greer's slope onto her name, and she lets it just this once, because ownership of handwriting is a smaller fight than the one they are in. In procurement, the polite black inset goes blacker and then resumes, not with frame, but with 4 characters typed as if by a person with an old machine and the good habit of hitting the keys hard. 48-4 F4D45. The analyst, who is not in the room to see it, will find the timestamp and the checksum later and try to decide whether the day has earned the right to laugh. The oxygen monitors hit 15.5 and decide to be rude. A siren that was supposed to be a beep opens its mouth until the nitrogen fills it halfway and then stops trying. Facility procedure says leave. Humanity says do not leave while a picture of your face has chosen to stay behind at a height where someone would stand to tell you they meant it. Greer splits the difference. We close the door, he says. We do not lock it. He looks at Sarah when he says we because we is a tool he trusts. She nods because nodding is easier to carry than language. They step out. The cage door meets its frame with a kiss that thinks it's a verdict. The Faraday lock does not engage because there is no power to make it decide. Kaya tapes a seal across the seam that will show if someone chooses to be interesting. The tape sits with a quiet, anticipatory glow of adhesives near cold metal. In the administration panel, 30 seconds ahead, the seal is already broken by a hand that is either theirs or kindness. 30 seconds later, nothing moves. Not everything the future shows you is true. It would be unbearable if it were. On the way down the corridor, the overhead lights. Dead by law. Learn to be dim enough to ask questions. Their footfalls announce them to a hallway that has learned to count. In the clinic, EEGs drift briefly out 11.11, as if courtesy demanded they not march when the door is being closed on purpose. In the vault, a demon that was taught only one party trick writes home into a field that was supposed to be blank and then underlines with a checksum of its own checksum, because sometimes sincerity is an infinite regress and you deserve what you get. The journalist, 3 cities away, wakes to a room that has learned how to be dark without fear. His replacement projector, gift, theft, sits dumb on the table like a polite animal that has never hunted. His window remembers what glass is for and shows him only himself, which today is a favor. He checks his phone and finds a draft that consists of 4 words. Do not watch alone. He deletes it. It returns. He turns the brightness up until the pixels flee. He sleeps again with his eyes open. Night takes the building in a way that is not conquest. Annex 4, inhabited by nitrogen, and a picture people with masks around their necks, rests. The monitors hold their frame in the dark until the dark learns to hold it for them. The inner shadows keep their little vigils at bezels that no longer glow in any meaningful sense of that verb. The mirrors forget to be late and simply become surfaces that learn for a while how to be a door and now choose the older, humbler craft of being there. In the morning, when air and electricity return like rules, the screens are off. The last frame is not burned in like a ghost trying to learn chemistry. The tape on the cage seems unbroken. The oxygen monitors have earned back their green. The PA does not speak. The base-wide EEGs ride 11.11 for a minute at noon because habit is a religion, and then their holders go to lunch. The world pretends well. They stand in the doorway and look through the glass at a rig dismantled to a polite skeleton and a room that has become a stage after a cast struck its set correctly. No one presses a palm to the laminate. Luis equips himself with a coil of fiber, like someone carrying a rope to a well. Kaya checks the doers, frowns at their frost, and writes a note about regulators that reads like affection. Dahl stands with his hands down and lets his shoulders be square, because it is a way to say yes that does not sell anyone secrets. Greer says, we will inventory. He does not say what, because the answer is not parts. Sarah looks at the mirrors, lawful, bright, refusing to apologize for being two-dimensional, and checks herself for lag. The reflection gives her back to herself on time. It is not a relief. It is a deadline. She thinks of the cassette in the cryo locker, sleeping under a rap disc that will one day be turned into a way to make the world sharper. She thinks of the greased pencil letters that have not learned to fade. She thinks of the sentence she wrote on the pad, and the way it looks naive and correct. Stay with names. She looks at the team and says their names quietly, one by one, and the room keeps them. The PA does not answer. The building holds breath the way a person holds it before they decide whether to laugh or to say stay. Outside, in the heat that pretends to be innocence, the flag on the pole conducts its ordinary experiment in aerodynamics. On a distant ridge, a weather balloon performs the oldest trick in the book, being a question mark in the sky that will never return your calls. The day is clean, which is a kind of lie that helps. The lab will learn to breathe oxygen again. The mirrors will relearn lateness with practice. The inner shadows, if they are wise, will continue to prefer rectangles and patience. Before anyone touches a tool, before anyone signs a sheet with a hand that is definitely their own, the screens across the campus turn themselves on for exactly one frame and show exactly what you would show if you loved someone and knew they were about to go back to thinking they were alone. Their faces at the height of a kind apology, from the place where a person would stand if a person were allowed to be there. Then the frame is gone and the day, which had every right to be complicated, begins. The envelope is brown, not new and not the kind of old that smells like attics, somewhere between the age of things which have been in rooms that were emptied in a hurry. It is addressed by hand in a block script that tries very hard to be tidy and fails in a charming human way. There's no return. The stamps are a collage of definitive issues, the kind postal clerks reach for when the drawer is bored. She holds it a second longer than politeness to herself allows, and only then brings a paring knife through the gum as if she might find a vein. Inside, gray foam cut with a pocket a cassette could sleep in, and a small rectangle of brass cold enough to be rude. The nameplate is the sort of thing an institution orders by the hundred. Serif letters, black-filled. 2 holes for screws, a corner saw from fingers. G. Mason. It is either a signature or a sentence, and she knows immediately which it wants to be. The tape wears the dark, old shine of something that has been cold, and then not, cold and then not, until a polymer learns stoicism. Greased pencil on the spine. Her own instruction in her own hand, made years ago in a room full of oxygen, pretending not to be nitrogen. Do not watch alone. She sits with on the kitchen table and lets the house decide whether it is mourning or an excuse. It is the kind of quiet her new life practiced. A kettle that waits for intention, a window that remembers what seasons are. On the sill there is a small ceramic bird a friend made and apologized for, because love embarrasses makers. On the far counter a bowl of fruit tries to rot in a dignified way. The envelope smell finds the citrus and learns how to belong. She had moved to a city that did not know how to survive without public transit. She learned the minutiae of a street that changes names 3 times in 6 blocks. She learned her butcher's handwriting and the way the light in her apartment comes from an angle that convinces dust to applaud. She learned the hours when mirrors in a domestic space are merely surfaces and not instruments. She had told no one any of the good parts, which is a sad habit of people who were once told which nouns belonged to the room. It took years for the building in her body to come down to code. The PA in her head still sometimes said, "If you see us, we see you when a microwave door clicks shut." She learned to let it pass like a weather front with impeccable grammar. The 11.11 that once taught EEGs to stand up straight now shows up in her life as oven timers and the way she wakes, unalarmed, from a sleep that refuses to hold her hand all the way to morning. She is no longer certain of the distance between ritual and addiction, which is a merit badge they do not give you in any generous room. She turns the nameplate over. On the back, a faint score where screws sat for a long time and were educated by vibration. She can't help but look at angles that might match an office door. She pictures a liaison's iron smile and a hallway that pretended to be a spine, and the way Greer's voice has learned to walk on carpet. She has not said his first name out loud since the funeral that happened without a body and with a program that used the right font. She has said his last name many times, and every time felt the vowel try to open a door. She does a clean thing. She calls Kaya. The number does not live where it did. She calls the number it left behind. It rings into music that is generous until it apologizes. She sends a message like a letter folded too neatly. Received a package. Might have something that belongs to you. She signs with her name, and with a second name she still hates admitting to, the one the program used, with her degrees stapled to it like fresh staples that know they are temporary. She waits the way good weather waits for children. She does the wrong thing. She holds a cassette with 2 hands and takes it to the small television on the low shelf in a room that mimics a den, a room she had taught to be less serious than the kitchen. The player she kept lives under the TV like a patient animal. It has not been asked to do this in a long time and tries to be polite about its age by making a soft rubber belt whine a human ear can forgive. The title on the screen is a default that knows nothing. The remote's batteries are the right kind of tired. The label looks back at her from the spine of her hand. Do not watch alone. The sentence is stupid and wholly in hers. She stops long enough to tell the empty room that she knows better. She writes a message to Luis. His reply comes from a place named she has never been and does not plan to visit. It says, "Simply, I have a chair." She smiles because that is the only correct answer. She writes the doll, and the system informs her politely that the account is under construction. She writes to a general inbox for a general contractor with a name that could belong to the liaison, and appears to belong to a man who writes about HVAC in a newsletter tone. She does not send a letter to the family at the address on a certain program. She puts her phone in a drawer as if it were a knife at a child's picnic. She makes tea because water is the only thing that knows how to be both patient and urgent at the right time. She sets a cassette on the table next to the cup and watches vapor form the old script on surfaces. a text with no letters that only people who have learned more about instrument drift than the rest of us can read. She waits for dusk because the instruction, while not explicit about hour, implies an obedience to dark. If you watch bright things in daylight, they become manners instead of news. The city cooperates by being late afternoon. The light does that thing it does when it comes through other people's dinner hours. The windows across the street become explicit. Lies befriend their reflections, as if practicing for a test. She draws the shade and leaves it a little up because she has learned to give glass escape routes. She puts the tape in. The machine accepts it with the small bow it does when it forgives your fingers. The screen thinks about what to be and decides. Noise as snow, then noise as river, then signal as a loyal error. There is a leader that is leader, not message. She leans forward before she remembers she has spent a life telling other people that leaning forward does not make clocks move. Beneath the noise, a voice that is hers and not hers says the sentence like it learned a curse and found out it was a prayer. We were not behind your eyes. We were behind your certainty. The words do not arrive with the triumphant confidence of an agent. They arrive with the patient competence of a label maker. She sits back slowly because the body knows how to respect certain sentences with speed. It is not anger she feels. Anger was the old chemical they taught you when you needed your arms strong. This is a cleaner compound. She names it not defeat. She names it relief with sharp edges. She names it cartography. Something has drawn a line on a map inside her that tells the truth about the boundary between seeing and knowing. The cassette continues with the breath that is tape running. It hums at 60 in a way that would make facilities smile. Once, somewhere, someone loved to hum and taught it to sit. There are not pictures in the way that would make her an archivist. There are intervals of almost image, pressure on emotions, an old ration of light allowed to lay down where it likes. If she watches wrong, she sees faces. If she watches correct, she sees pressure maps. She tries to watch correct, fails with dignity, and forgives herself. The way the voice continues is a series of adjustments that feel like someone with a hammer choosing a screwdriver. It is hers because the vowel in her name is a hinge that does not belong to most languages. It is not hers because she has never allowed her consonants that much room. It says things like you would if you were trying to not break a person you were repairing. You tended the edge like a gardener. This is praise. You built rooms and aired them. This is praise. When we moved the table, you did not call it theft. This is why you are being told this now, inside a life that has learned how to be a kitchen. When the voice says Greer's name, it says a G like it is carrying something heavy up a few stairs. He knew old directives like hymns. He sang most of them correctly. He broke the tune where it was necessary for breath. He left a plate somewhere he was not supposed to leave a plate. Consider this a return. She does not cry. It is not a virtue. It is a temporary absence of floodgate. Floodgates in her life are efficient. They open when they choose. They do not respect scheduling. She holds a brass nameplate in her left hand the way one holds a warm stone at a beach sunset and pretends it was found by accident. She traces the letters not to learn them, but to prove the metal exists. Outside, someone on the street is learning to skateboard. The scraped concrete sound nails a rhythm to the window and then rides it. The board's wheels do a beat that could be 11.11 if you were hungry for evidence. She lets it be 13 just to prove a point to herself and loses track of that point almost immediately. There are other sounds under the noise. An aircraft, a fan, the small high whisper of a refrigerator that believes in its own compressor. Under everything the quiet that knows how to support vowels. The tape's voice speaks a sentence that makes her hate language for not having better furniture. We do not live where you hoped and do not die where you feared. We are not patients. We are not angels. We are not you. We are nothing that profits from the noun we. But we were behind the scaffolding that held your assertions when you rehearsed reality. And we reached through the beams and touched the screws to see if you would look. You did. Thank you. She thinks of the second shadows that learned to be polite moths. She thinks of mirrors that lag because time was briefly too crowded in one place. She thinks of signatures that drifted like rivers deciding new estuaries. She thinks of checking her name on badges with the irritability of someone who woke up on a ship whose stairs were moved by a prank. She thinks of the PA's child cadence and wonders if anyone has ever forgiven a sentence more times and still wanted it back. The tape says, "You built the right sentence for safety at the right time. Do not watch alone. You built the right room for harm to be measured and refused. If you must write that sentence again, write it larger. If you must write a new one, let it admit what joy is without lying about what appetite is." She presses pause not because she cannot bear it, but because bearing requires timing. The frozen noise freezes at a texture that looks like frost or salt or the skin of an orange when you stand too close. She takes the cassette out because ritual is medicine, and because she needs to stand up to convince her blood. She has not learned to be one thing for the rest of the day. She carries it to window because the instruction on the spine wants a witness. She tells herself she is only going to check the street. Outside her window, her reflection in the glass lifts a hand she hasn't moved and waves. It is the wave people use when the car that is leaving is at the corner and you are in the driveway and you believe in the next visit without needing to prove it. It is a small arc, not flagging, not hailing, not asking. A demonstration of the fact of an arm. Her own hand hangs obediently by her side. The glass decides to be generous and fills in the difference. She does not panic. She shakes the old animal at the base of her spine by saying its name in a calm voice. Fear. It sits. It is a good dog that has learned tricks that no longer help. She lifts her real hand in reply because she has learned that refusal is sometimes consent in different grammar. The reflection waves again in a slightly different tempo, and then not at all, and then once more after she lowers hers, as if the glass still remembers the mirror's laziness and wants to pay them a small tribute. She smiles at herself in a way that would embarrass anyone who has ever loved her, and has not been told that kindness is a late phenomenon. There's a note in the envelope she hadn't seen. It was wedged under the foam, and it smells faintly of the glue that keeps them from being a more honest era. It says, in the plainest handwriting any decade knows, per your instruction. Not alone. The postmark is a place on a map she could drive to if she called no one and answered no questions. She chooses not to be dramatic. Dramatic is for people who must invent gravity to be interesting. She does grin like a thief. She texts Luis a sentence that will be impossible to misunderstand. Tonight, he writes back for as long as it takes. He adds a picture of a chair that looks like a ship's deck built by someone who has never seen the ocean. She texts Kaya a picture of the brass plaque. There is no graceful way to ask a grown woman whether she wants to cry with you on a Tuesday, and so Sarah does the graceless thing that works. We can sit by the window and count seconds and swear. They convene because loneliness is a choice they can refuse. Luis brings an old oscilloscope he insists is for decoration, and promptly uses to find the 50 hertz I'm squatting in a lamp. Kaya brings oranges because that bottle on the break room table had been a signpost and not a fruit. Dahl brings his shoulders and the way he keeps doors honest. He has learned how to be in rooms without being an instrument. It cost him a good thing and gave him a different good thing in return. They put the cassette on the table like bread. The tape's first sentence does not edge into the room. It sits down on the couch the way an old friend sits down on a couch they have been told is new. We were not behind your eyes. We were behind your certainty. Luis makes the small sound people make when someone finally names a splinter. Kaya, whose hands have memorized torque specs for bolts that hold up roofs, presses the base of her thumb into the center of her palm to not cry, which is an engineer's version of swallowing pride. Dahl nods with the patience of a pilot taught that not everything requires a correction. The voice that is hers and not hers goes on with the improvised scripture. When you looked at a screen, you were not screening us. You were revealing your ability to stand where the line is and not move it for convenience. We admire this in primates. We admire this in ants. We admire this in you. When we are called gaze, you flinch, which is correct. We were not scopic. We were weight on a frame. Kaya says very softly, weight on a frame. She repeats it like prayer. That's what buildings do to teach themselves not to lie. Luis laughs and then covers a smile with the back of his wrist like a teenager, because joy at this scale can't be public in a room that still knows what it is to be on deployment. The tape tries a story and then discards it halfway because stories are dangerous in rooms where narrative once wore tranquilizers. There was a time you were small and pressed your face to glass because you had not been told what privacy was and what windows owe. There was a time you were told that looking is taking, and you apologized to the ocean. You were wrong then about the ocean, but correct about the taking. The voice pauses, adjusts its gear, and comes in lower. We never asked you to close your eyes. We asked you to know the difference between closing and choosing not to see. Kaya asks if she recorded this herself in a late night with a drink and an honest pen. Sarah shakes her head with an economy that convinces Metal to stop singing. I don't say primates like that, she says. And I never thanked ants for anything in my life. Luis mouths, you should start without sound like a person signing to a friend through a window at a hospital. The window obliges and looks like itself and not an instrument, which is a mercy. She had built a ritual for visitors. She would give them a small tour of her apartment the way people in new cities pretend their homes are museums of their survival. She had a phrase for the view that was not good and therefore kind. It's a neighborhood that learned how to keep a tree alive. Luis points at the tree in the near courtyard and asks whether its leaves move on schedule. They laugh because leaves are fuse clocks. And yet when a breeze slides through, the branches take up exactly the slow rhythm of a person raised by a PA system. If you see us, we see you, which is to say the same movement you see on any afternoon, given enough hunger to annotate it. The tape has a habit of leaving holes correctly proportioned for your imagination to build guilt into. It leaves one now in Kaya, trauma's patient carpenter, fills it with gentler wood. She says, behind certainty means what we build around a sentence to keep it from falling down, not the sentence itself, not taste, not opinion, the scaffolding. Dahl reaches for the brass plaque and rubs his thumb over the G the way you rub a rosary bead until it knows your oil. He says nothing because he learned somewhere that speaking affection for the dead in rooms with equipment can change the calibration. The second half of the tape is behavior, not sermon. It is the old hum in different keys. 72 on a carrier that once carried a human analog. 11.11 on a track that taught a bass to march while sitting down. Small clicks where someone who had never seen a microphone before argues gently with air. Between the sounds, there are silences of the right length for people to say yes or no to nothing. The tape, being tape, says nothing back. When it ends without asking for applause. The machine makes a domesticated clatter. The screen goes black politely. The room remembers it as a room. They find themselves in that state where you almost stand and don't, as if leaving a couch has contractual force. The window takes their reflection and arranges it at a height meant for seeing and not hunting. Their faces lift and tilt and behave like faces that do not gawk. Outside the window, the lamp across the street, which belongs to a woman who appears to brew kombucha as a secular sacrament, turns on, their reflections brightened by courtesy. And then, as if the little local arrangement of photons had secretly applied for a grant, their reflections lift their hands without the consent of their arms and wave once, twice, with a rhythm that is not 11.11 or any of the old rhythms, only the domestic tempo of mercy. Kaya puts her palm to the glass. The real hand follows late. The reflection's hand follows on time. Dahl rests his knuckles on the sill because you show reverence with contact in certain regions of the country. Luis checks the room with the practiced look of someone who has checked a room for wires that are eyes and eyes that are wires. He finds nothing except the air doing the old, boring thing of being someone else's. They do not watch alone. They do not watch again that night. This matters. They eat oranges and talk about roofs and tell the story of the dumbest screw they ever dropped into a vent. They say the wrong names for things and correct themselves without shame. They let silence grow without spraying it for weeds. They do not try to trap the wave in the equation. It is the only refraining. They do not sprint to the dead's doors. It is the only progress. After they leave, Sarah finds the envelope again because envelopes acquire gravity when they have already succeeded once. There is an address on the postmark she cannot stop reading. There is a second slip of brass under the foam she did not find earlier, smaller, curved as if it had once lived on a curved surface. It has no letters. It has 2 drilled holes. It smells like the inside of a pocket that learned to be polite. It belongs to some machine with pride, and that makes her laugh without permission. She writes to the journalist because it is the kind of favor you owe to your past. She writes, "I have a reel that is not a reel but insisted on being one anyway." He writes back with a line that is so simple its elegance is self-defense. "I have a window that has learned to be a page." They agree to disagree about which floor history happens on. They meet in a cafe that turns cups upside down when it wants to close, and he wears the face of someone who knows the difference between compulsion and work. They say words like "we are both still alive" with other nouns around them to give them cover. Months later, Sarah finds a nameplate G Mason not on a shelf but on the floor under a chair, as if the metal had decided gravity was a kind of retirement. She picks it up and feels the old tremor in infrasound. Not fear, not grief, the third thing you learn, the one that is less name in print. She sets it by the window because if a plaque wants a shrine, a sill with plants and an old tape player is a gentler church than institutional carpet. The brass darkens in the way brass admits it has been touched. On a certain day when she has said no to enough invitations to count as a discipline, the plaque warms under sunlight, and she thinks absurdly of the sound of a pen on onion skin. The city ages her correctly. Knees tell weather. Mirrors tell truth when asked politely, and the occasional lie for the sake of mercy. Screens behave, mostly, as screens do. They show you maps and friends and far distances in your own room. Every now and then, near midnight, one of them turns on by itself and presents not a face, not a limb, nothing petitioning. It shows the room from the height of an apology and stays for the single beat that makes old dogs wonder if their names are being called. She lifts her hand, only rarely now. Etiquette has become internal. On an anniversary she does not name, a package arrives containing a photocopy of a block of text, the directive that had once been a method. Tranquilize the narrative. Someone has written, in pencil that is tired of being confident, the 4 letters that had once been written in a room that pretended it could be invisible. Don't. She puts it under the tape player, so that the weight of the machine teaches the paper to stay flat. She smiles at the extravagance of the gesture. There is a child in the apartment below hers who sings. The child sings badly, which is another way of saying extraordinarily, because the voice does not know there is a pitch it should be on, only that noises the size of the body can be introduced into rooms like daylight. The child's favorite rhythm is a fractional thing that would make the bass's grass blush in recognition. Sarah hums along sometimes, mischievous, shifting the beat on purpose to declare to whoever is listening that free will is a toy and a tool. The child does not mind. The child adjusts. She suspects the child will be very happy or very dangerous and hopes, in her unfair way, that the child learns a trade as well as a theology. On a night when the weather refuses to make mistakes, she takes the tape out for the last time, because endings are a habit you can practice until you can carry them correctly. She cleans the heads of the player with a cotton swab, because competence is the only ritual she trusts now. She sets the cassette in the well, pushes a rectangular button with the fondness people reserve for old cars and hardback books, and lets the noise fill the room exactly as much as it has earned. The voice that is hers and not hers finishes the sentence it was not asked to finish. We stayed as long as you let us. We left the tools you could bear. We did not change where you end, and the world begins. We asked you to change how you chart it. The last sound the tape makes before it chooses to be plastic again is a small click that could be ending or beginning that decided to be respectful. She rewinds because this is a noble, fussy act. She labels a case with another line in greased pencil because the past, while incompetent forgiveness, can be trained to carry notes. She writes for whoever is next. When you are brave, invite someone over. When you are not, invite two. At the window, her reflection stands with the same posture her mother had when she found a good tomato in winter. Pleased, suspecting a trick, refusing to ruin surprise by telling anyone. The reflection raises a hand very slowly as if asking permission to be the creature in a story that had once been told about a room full of glass. Sarah raises hers even slower. They wave at each other once, not because the gesture means anything cosmic, but because it is the smallest loyalty a person can extend to their own face. Hello. Stay, I see you. Be wrong with me until we learn what right would even look like. Later, in bed, her phone vibrates in a drawer with the discreet gilded devices in exile. The text is from a number with no name. It reads, "If you see us." She writes back without negotiating with herself first. We see you. There is no reply because there never needed to be. Outside, on the glass of the dark city, other people's reflections attend to their own windows and their own sentences. The building across the street lifts a dozen hands it did not intend to. The night waves back, because this is what nights do when asked correctly. And inside, in a room with a chair and a plaque and a small machine that has learned to be a reliquary without pride, a woman who misplaced her certainty on purpose falls asleep, having finally installed in her chest a better instrument than confidence. Attention, calibrated without witnesses, forgiving, late when it needs to be, and always, always accompanied.